Good. Good morning. Slightly strange to be in the theatre at 9 o'clock in the morning, but there you go, here we are. Could be any time of the day or night. You're very welcome indeed to this celebration, and it's an exploration of Waterford as Ireland's best place to live. And a tremendous honour to have been given this award by the Irish Times. I think some of us were under the sneaking suspicion that this was the case all along, but it's nice that it's actually been made official. And sad to say, in 2022, having a place to live is a privilege, so living in the best place is an even greater one. And sometimes, you know, we do take these things totally for granted. So taking some time out this morning just to ask how we're there, why we're there, and how we move forward now that everybody's going to know it's the best place to live is actually a good thing. And, you know, taking things for granted, even just a few minutes ago when David McWilliams came into the theatre, he said, "Oh my God, isn't this gorgeous?" And, you know, I've been here so many times and I also think it's gorgeous, but I'd forgotten to actually stop and look around. And so we are incredibly privileged to live in Waterford. So we have this morning some of the finest journalists and columnists in the country who are going to come and facilitate the topics. The panellists are no lightweights either, so some wonderful wisdom and knowledge to be mined here this morning. So I think it's going to be very interesting and exciting. 4 lively discussions, as I said, and hopefully we'll get a chance to squeeze in some questions from the audience, if there are any, at the end of each discussion. Now, in a post-COVID world, we're not allowed, well, not allowed, but it's not a good idea to be passing a microphone from person to person. So technology has stepped in again, and we have Slido. So if you downloaded the QR code, or if you scan the QR code on the way in, with Slido, you can just pose the question through your mobile phone. By the magic of the internet, it arrives up here, and we'll ask the panel if we get some time before the end of it. Also, if you are on tweeting or if you're on any of the social platforms, the hashtag this morning is Celebrate Waterford. So if you wouldn't mind using that, that would be helpful as well. So by all means, keep your phones on, but we would ask you now just to check to make sure they're turned to silent. And while we're checking things, if you'd like to take note of the nearest fire exit as well, just in case everything gets a bit heated, you never know. Anyway, it's more than likely through the doors that you entered, but where you're seated now, you might have a different exit. So now is a good time to do that. So our first discussion this morning is titled Our Burgeoning Talent Pool. And to facilitate, please welcome economist, author, and Irish Times columnist, David McWilliams.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? This is such an extraordinarily beautiful building to be in. It's gorgeous. And thank you very much, Nicola. I'm just going to MC this morning. But it was interesting. I haven't been down in this part of the world for a long time. And yesterday, I drove down from Dunleary. And I went on Google and I said, which is the best way? Because I typically was going to go around the M50 and then down via Kildare and Kilkenny and down. But Google said, no, go straight down the coast. And the drive here from Dunleary down is extraordinary. And the further away from Dunleary you get, the more beautiful it is. So it is one of these things that I have no real idea of how gorgeous the countryside on this way down was. And it's one of these secrets. So today our job is to tell the world about the joys of this neck of the woods. And it was interesting, as I was driving down, of course, all the news from the economy is incredibly negative. And all the news is about energy prices and the price of diesel and what's going to happen when the Russians demand rubles and people don't give it. And people were talking about, 1973 and the oil crisis and these sort of similarities. And I was thinking to myself about 1973, because if you read all the economic columns, a lot of them are about this. And 1973 and 74, I was very young, but I do remember it being a bizarre period simply because of a thing called the Rumble in the Jungle. You might remember it was a boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman in the Congo. Unusual place. Now, the reason this is interesting is it shows you what you can do when you change tactics. Ali was, by the way, my father actually rented a colour TV for the night so that our road could watch this particular event in colour, not in black and white. And I came home the following day expecting to see Tom and Jerry in colour, and he'd actually given back to Eddie Totterdell's TV rentals in Dunleary. So I remember this is seared on my youthful imagination as one of the great frauds perpetrated against me. But in that fight, something really amazing happened. So Muhammad Ali is 32 years old. He hasn't boxed for a long time at any competitive level. He's regarded as a guy who's just going to turn up and maybe take his winner's purse or his purse and leave. Not his winner's purse, his runner's-up purse. George Foreman is 22 years old. He is the world champion. He has just knocked out the former world champion, a guy called Ken Norton, and he knocked him down 4 times in the first round. He has the most explosive punch in boxing. Ali is unfit. He hasn't trained. Everybody thinks Ali's going to get completely hammered, and actually he's going to get injured. And of course, the problem with Foreman is his box was so hard, his punch was so hard, that the only way you could survive against Foreman, possibly, was to allow himself, he's so big and so strong, to punch himself out, to tire himself by punching you. But the problem is, who could sustain that level of punishment in the ring? Nobody had gone, think about it, nobody had gone more than 4 rounds with this guy. Nobody in his professional life. And Ali and his manager, Angelo Dundee, were trying to figure out, is it possible, is it even possible to go into the ring with this guy and survive 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 rounds? Certainly not when you're out of shape and you're in your 30s and this guy's a young fella. But they devised something. They noticed that the rubber in the ropes in the boxing ring were quite different to the United States, and they were much thicker, right? And Angelo Dundee figured out that if Ali could sit on the ropes, the elasticity of the ropes would actually dissipate all the energy of Foreman, and maybe, just maybe, he could sustain the assault in order to knock Foreman out when Foreman knocked himself out by becoming so tired. And the first round happens, and Ali is on the ropes. And he says to everybody before the game, or the match, I've got a strategy. And the strategy was called rope the dope. He basically figured that Foreman was strong but really stupid. Okay? And if you listen to the YouTube things now, you've Ali just taking all these punches on the rope saying, that all you got, Georgie boy? And he's just basically saying, you're dumb. Foreman's getting more and more angry, more and more angry. He's hitting these haymakers. And then the 4th round, he starts to get tired. Ali's sitting on the ropes taking all the flack. In the 5th round, he's starting to get tired. In the 6th round. And then in the 7th round, Foreman is knackered, not because Ali has actually ever hit him, but because he's almost knackered himself out by hitting this guy who won't go down because all the strength is dissipating through the rubber. And in the 7th round, Ali knocks him out. The biggest upset in sporting history by roping the dope. Now, the fascinating thing about that is that Ali simply devised a strategy to disguise his own weaknesses and amplify his own strengths, to therefore dissipate somebody else's strengths and suggest that those strengths are weaknesses. And when I look at areas of Ireland, and when I look at areas of the world in economics, right, what always amazes me is that the regions that have a strategy, that have figured out, like Ali, how do I compete in this world? How do I actually get noticed? How do I actually do the right thing? They are the regions that do extremely well because they identify what may have been my weakness is actually a strength, And what may be somebody else's strength, or some other region's strength, is actually a weakness. And you play on that. So today, the only question I have for you, maybe to think in the back of your heads, is, are you an ally in Waterford, or are you a foreman? Are you going to figure out your rope the dope strategy to actually amplify the clear positives of this neck of the woods? Or are you going to sit back and let somebody else dictate the rules for you? Because I think if you take the ally approach, certainly from what I've seen around here and what I've read about GDP and the fact that you have 40% more disposable income for being here than in Dublin, which is always very, very good. I think the positives are enormous. It's just a matter of amplifying them and making them work for you at every stage. And thankfully, we have 3 people now who are going to help us to formulate that roping the dope strategy for Waterford. Because we want to talk about education and the link between education and economic growth, and education and quality of life, and education and sustainability, and how the economy grows sustainably when we have a talent pool. And I'm going to call upon the President of Water Institute of Technology, Professor Willie Donnelly, to join me up here. Big round of applause for Willie. Over the far side. And the head of global supply chains at Sanofi, Ruth Beadle. Ruth. And the head of enterprise at Waterford Local Enterprise Office, Richie Walsh, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Willie, just tell me, before we start, how are things going here?
Things are going exceptionally well. I mean, on the 1st of May, as everybody knows, we have the first University of the Southeast, the creation of the Technological University of the Southeast, called SETU.
Yep.
It's a milestone. It's something we've worked for over 50 years. I think it's going to be a game changer for the city. And so from an educational perspective, it's, I think things are really well. But I think also, I came here in 1996. I remember my first impression was of an industrial city, one of the grey industrial city. We went through extremely difficult times in the downturn of the economy. But thanks to the relationship with industry, with local government, and with education, we transformed the city. So this is a transformed city.
Just give me an example of that. Because when I was young, I always thought, my dad used to take me to watch a lot of football. And Waterford, we're a big football club. Yeah. I remember coming down here years ago, and it felt like an industrial city. Yeah. And it felt like a big, those British cities that were based around one big industry.
Yeah.
And tell me how that's
changed.
That
was, and in a way, it was a crisis for the city itself when Waterford Crystal closed.
Yeah.
Because definition of excellence of world class is Waterford Crystal. We created a group recently called Crystal Valley Tech, using the word crystal, which was for the tech industry in the southeast. Now, it's interesting, I just remembered recently that when I came in 1996, there was one IT industry in Waterford. It sold boxes, right? Today, thanks to that relationship with industry and the college, who worked to create a tech industry, today there are 3,000 people employed in the tech industry in the southeast.
3,000?
Yeah, and there was 3,000 people in Crystal. It's just a coincidence, but that's a transformation into a high-tech, innovative industry that's attracting young and highly talented people, not only our graduates, but people from outside. So to me, this is, and by the way, when you have high-tech industry, when you have people who are highly qualified and come into the city, then you have the arts and you have the culture that comes with it. So it's been a transformative period for Waterford and the region.
Yeah, it's funny, I've always thought the quality of graffiti is very important for cities. And the no, really, I have. I'm a big believer, in that the more scrubbed up the city, the less interesting it is. The Waterford walls, for example, I find that it's a statement about urban art that is coming from here. It's not coming from anywhere else. And it's very new, and it's precisely your point that culture comes from the street.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily get dropped down. Now tell us, Ruth, Sanofi have been here, you've 800 people here. Again, why Waterford? Why this neck of the woods?
Well, originally, it wasn't Sanofi, it was Genzyme, right? So Genzyme was a US-based company, and they were looking for an entry point into Europe. Okay, so anywhere in Europe.
Yeah.
The IDA did an amazing job, which they do with a lot of multinationals, right?
Yeah, they do.
And sold an image, I think a vision really of Waterford and what it could become. And actually it has become that over the last 20 years. So Genzyme moved in probably the early 2000s. That decision was made into a sunglass factory. Okay?
Sunglass factory. Okay.
X-Ray-Ban facility,
yeah.
Which was converted into a tableting facility within 1 year. So pretty amazing.
Which is exactly what economists always talk about, going up the value chain.
Up the value.
Because you don't want to be making sunglasses. As a general rule, it's grand, but you don't want to be betting
Not
your
in
house.
Ireland, anyway.
Not in this neck of the woods, yeah, exactly. People with my complexion don't look great with sunglasses.
So speed, but also the ecosystem. So between the WIT, which is now becoming obviously part of SETU, but also the ecosystem. So there was Bausch & Lomb. Now we have West, right? We have spin-off companies, Airgen. We have not spin-off, but actually in companies that have indigenous companies that have come from some talent within those organizations, and we've started up ourselves. So that is what the IDA sold. And in addition to education, a highly educated workforce. About 75% or 80% of our employees would have degrees.
And are many of them locals?
There would be a significant proportion of local people.
I hear. Come on. Turn that off. I'll tell you a story about these going off. Years ago, I was writing that the economy was the housing market was overvalued and the banks were la. 15 years ago. And back then, the banks were particularly muscular in their attitude to journalists who were stepping out of line. Wasn't the green jersey. And I was called into a large bank that will remain nameless, Bank of Ireland, in order to be dressed down by the chief executive and his not chief financial bottle washer, whatever his name is, and his henchmen. And the idea was that I would never work in the town again, saying that the economy might collapse and the housing market might collapse. And just as he was being briefed by all these henchmen, Gavin and Marcus and Ross and bang a Gonzaga off a lot of them. But anyway, just as he was about to give the point that would have nailed me and would have destroyed my career, his mobile phone rang. And his ringtone, just think about what the ringtone of this champion of Irish finance was. Don't you want me, baby? Swear to God. Just think about what's going on in your man's head as he's looking at himself in the mirror. So do turn them off, by the way. You don't want that. No. But fascinating. I just want to speak before I come to you, Richie. I just want to talk about this intersection between education, the university getting a new title, getting bigger, producing more graduates, the likes of Sanofi, requiring workers, but also requiring this link between everything. So that actually you're getting small companies feeding into the multinationals, feeding back into the university, that sort of ecosystem.
Yeah. But before we move on, in terms of diversity, we have local people, we also have about 19 different nationalities, right? So within the facility here. So that's also a very important point. But in terms of, I think the real question is, why did Sanofi stay here?
Yes.
So it's not why did we come, it's why did we stay? So 20-odd years on, 22 years on, why did we stay? And it is for our ability to deliver, right? So within Sanofi, the Waterford plants competes with 65 others, right? Okay? So the business...
So you have 65 plants worldwide. So you've been benchmarked against these people all the time.
Permanently, right?
Yeah.
So, and the reason we've managed here in Waterford to I suppose, grow and expand, right, is due to the talent, and it is due to the link, and it goes back to the link with the IDA, right? The link, as you've just called out, between technology, education, and industry, And I'll give you a personal example. About 5 or 6 years ago, digital was a new thing, right? So we were all going to go digital, you know. And you know, what is digital? And it really has got to solve a problem that you have. But I went actually across to Tech Valley, Crystal Valley, right? And worked with Willie and his team, right, and a broader team of people, as well as going to other industries within Ireland to define what should the digital future for Sanofi Waterford be, okay? And it is that cross-section. So whilst we came, and there it was probably more of an industrial city, which now has transformed into an ecosystem for pharma here in the southeast, that link to technology is more and more important, right? And the link between, and that's where the education and the SETU will be critical for us, right?
And also the ability to have those conversations. Because if you're benchmarking yourself against a similar place in Germany or a similar place in Singapore, you know, the idea that you can turn around and say, actually, now we know what we're doing, and we've got the help of the university. I mean, this is enormously important, and it's that amazing thing that we kind of forget that business operates on people who know each other. This is the really interesting thing, you know, that you actually end up doing business with people you like and you know, as a general rule. You know,
it's a relationship.
It is all about relationships, and it's and kind of putting all that together, Richie, is probably, you know, enterprise here, yourselves, trying to figure out, you know, who are we going to get in the local enterprise board? What can we do? If, let's say, for example, if I were to, or, you know, obviously a younger person were to say, okay, I'm going to set up on my own. What sort of aid? Because it's very, very hard to set up on your tot. What sort of supports are there for?
Well, first and foremost, if I could say, just coming back to the point that William made earlier on there, I think it's hugely critical. The whole idea of access to creativity and idea development is massive. There are 3 excellent innovation gateways, for instance, here that no other city in the country has.
What are they?
They are SEAM, they are what is now the Walton Institute, and there's PMBRC. All excellent institutions and all built around the idea of creativity, about idea development, and the bringing through of those ideas through technologies. So that, if you like, the idea development places there. We've also got a significant set of excellent incubation places where people work closely with other agencies and the academia and with other people in industry, which is critical. Places like Arc Labs, Kinetic Labs, but a whole tranche of enterprise centres right around the county that, you know, are becoming far more vibrant now in a post-COVID kind of an environment. So in my mind, you have the idea development, you have the spaces, but I think what Ruth said a second ago, Billy's intimated as well, we've more and more the idea of the coming togetherness as well, the idea of people working together in a sort of a networked harmony, so that
very
I can get help.
Uncharacteristic for Ireland, by the way.
What's that?
Very uncharacteristic. People all working together.
No, absolutely.
No, really, because normally what are you doing? What are I doing? You're saying there's a sense of joint enterprise here.
Absolutely. Let's say it like this. I know now, from where I come from, that if I happen to be a young entrepreneur or whatever, that there's a whole range of support systems out there that I can stick my fingers towards, and I'll receive a receptive voice. And I think that's critical in the middle of that whole idea of expertise and support lying around.
Go for Willie.
No, what's uncharacteristic in Ireland is we don't fall out. Not that we don't work together, but
I go on. I can't wait to hear about the rows after the gig.
But
okay.
it's an interesting point. What Richie was saying. We set up Arc Labs. I think it was in about 2000, and we had this wonderful room that we made available to entrepreneurs, and they came into the room, and in the morning did courses, and in the afternoon they developed their business. And I had my research group next to it, and I noticed every afternoon there was nobody in there. And I was going, wow, I could use a bit of that space, but there's nobody in there. So I went in and I talked to some of the entrepreneurs. And one of them, I said, I don't understand. You're here in the morning because you come in for the courses, but you're gone in the afternoon, but you have this facility. And he said to me, yeah, but the thing is that you know, we have to share phones and spaces. I don't want people to hear my good idea. And I said to him, well, that's rather strange, because I have about 100 good ideas a day. It's not, if you want to make a business, it's not the idea. It's actually linking the knowledge to the marketplace, right? And this is really at the secret of that ecosystem, what we have here. Because knowledge creation, which is at the heart of modern society, us academics, it might surprise you, sometimes we're very egocentric,
Never.
we used to believe that the fountain of knowledge, all knowledge, was created in the university. In actual fact, the thing we found in the Knowledge Society is the sharing of knowledge. That what you get is, and what you've got unique in Waterford is, by bringing together the entrepreneurs, bringing together industry, bringing together the education, is that flow of knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, because of the size of Waterford and because of having created that ecosystem, and the other thing I would say is what's important, which some people don't understand, is a critical mass. Ruth mentioned the critical mass. Google always locates next to Facebook and the other ones because you need that ecosystem. But the uniqueness which we have and that we will develop and which will put Waterford and the southeast on the map is that sharing and flow of knowledge. But that idea that person had, that a good idea immediately is important. Good ideas are not important. It's actually solving a problem.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that, but I don't want people to get my good idea. It's funny in education. Remember when I was in school, there'd be fellas in the very front of the class, and they'd be doing this all the time, right? remember those lads, right? And you'd be saying, "What's the answer to number 2? Little feck off," right? Okay, right? And then the teacher would say, "Dave McWilliams, stop copying." And to copy was the worst thing you could ever do in school, right? And you'd be sent out, and my mother is a school teacher, and anybody who's the son of a retired national school teacher, we can form a self-help group later on, about, Moontor knows everything all the time. But it's that idea that in school, to copy, when I was a kid, was the worst thing possible. But in actual fact, to copy is how we learn.
Yeah.
And it's actually this idea of copying is actually, so you guys have a good idea, somebody else has a good idea, I copy it, I adapt it, I customize it, and the process of how you get to market is the first idea sometimes doesn't get anywhere near it. And what you're saying is there is this copying culture here, and copying is good is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I think it's having for the link between the three elements we spoke about, is about having a common purpose.
Yeah.
Right? So size is important, right? It is important, and because we're relatively small, we're agile. So everybody knows everybody. As you said, it comes down to the relationship. But it's really having that common ambition for Waterford, for the southeast, across the sectors.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the three of you, what is that vision? So what so if we go back to me coming down here to watch football years ago, the industrial heritage of Waterford Glass being both an extraordinary brand and, as far as I could see, industrial relation-wise, maybe a textbook idea of how not to do things. So you've got two things coming at one time. You have a great brand, but a real messy management versus workers conflict. Then over a difficult 20-year period, maybe 30 years actually, the city shifts. Now you're in this position where, as Willie said, there's at least as many people working in tech as there were in the factory. What's the 10-year view? Where do you see this place?
Well, I suppose if I can take that, because I'm part of a group tasked with developing an economic and enterprise strategy for the county for the next while. And I mean, the first thing that I'd be inclined to say is that economy, and this yourself, an enterprise can't live in a vacuum. It lives within the totality of the environment that we live in. And I think the kind of thing that we're celebrating here, the idea of Waterford's best place to live, is a critical, hugely, or the island's best place, is a desperately huge starting point. So I think the whole idea about a sense of vision for the place is that first and foremost that we a place that is willing to adapt, willing to change, willing to have a sense of its own soul, if you like, but leading the region, which we've never led before, and not leading because we're the biggest town in the region, but because we are doing things here that are the correct ways of doing things. So I think the vision for the future has to be about collaboration, it has to be about a sense of togetherness, it has to be about a shared vision, and it has to be about developing projects and driving them. that will make sure that that kind of a vision comes to pass. Because in the past, we weren't great at driving through the vision and of getting everybody behind it. So that, in my mind, is the big, huge challenge. To me, it's in a way encompassed by what is known as Waterford Greenway. Just as a notion, and it is that idea that you spoke about when I go to the Crystal, it's about the pursuit of excellence. It is about the pursuit of joining things together, which is exactly what the Greenway does. And it also...
Tell me about the Greenway.
Well, the Greenway, in my mind, is something that is...
You're talking to a Dunleary bloke.
Yeah,
so
it is.
doesn't
First
do
and foremost,
greenways.
on two or three different occasions, it's one of the best pieces of Irish tourism infrastructure, which is huge. So it's a 46-kilometre piece of old railway track, but it's not so much that it's now converted into a recreational experience. It is the quality of it, and it is what is alongside it, the likes of Mount Congreve and the sea and the Cumra Mountains and everything like that. So it is an experience, but an experience that everybody who comes here and leaves it will say, that was magnificent. And it is mainly not that it happened easily, because it didn't. There was huge resistance, for the sake of argument. But it's working with that resistance and through that resistance and working with all the other partners and stakeholders to get that common thing and to make it work for everybody. And the everybody is critical. In my mind.
From my perspective, I came here 23 years ago, okay? I grew up in a place not far from Dunleary, right? So a beautiful part of the world. But via the UK, I came back here. And this place has transformed in the last 23 years. I came why? I wanted a better quality of life and a career I could move from company to company. That wasn't there 23 years ago. That is here now.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's an offering. The Greenway, this lovely jewel, various things, they've all transformed in the last 23 years. Or if I go even beyond, before that, years ago when we used to have cattle running up and down the quay here. Right, I don't know, does anyone remember that? Or maybe not, right?
Cattle?
Cattle, yeah.
For live export?
For live export, yeah.
Okay.
So this city has transformed and really transformed. I think the trick for Waterford, and my personal ambition, which is why I've joined the governing body of the SETU, is what will Waterford be in 2040? Okay, and Waterford cannot be the next Limerick, or let's look at Galway, or can we become Dublin, right? We have not yet, I think, got an absolute clear vision as to where are we going to go in the next 20 years. And that's the trick for me, because we have a beautiful county. Our city, I said I wouldn't be provocative, and here I go, right? Our city, to attract, I bring a lot of visitors, or have brought a lot of visitors into the town at times. It could be more vibrant, particularly during the week, right? We could have leverage our heritage and our culture and increase the experience, I think, within our city.
Can I ask you something on that issue? Do we know, or do we have a sense of how many people live in the city? I mean, is it the same as most Irish cities and towns, where the centre of the city is reasonably depopulated, so it has that sort of sense after 6 or 7 that it's empty, and then that, of course, that feeds on itself. I mean, are there any moves, for example, to repopulate the centre, living over the shop, all that sort of apartment developments in town, that sort of stuff?
One major drive here is
because that would change everything. That's the difference between European cities. You go into them, they feel full at night because punters live there.
Yeah.
There's a cultural quarter initiative here. And I think it's a critical component of exactly what you're talking about. It's the whole idea of energising an old, abandoned, commercial city as was. And I think it's critical that that works for everybody. There are a number of partners within that, and it's only at its initial stages. Significant amount of regional urban regeneration funding gotten for the place. But the whole idea has to be, in my mind, exactly what you're talking about. Looking at spaces that are vacant and derelict and killing those off because they're the most...
Yeah, because
but also
they also create more dereliction. Dereliction begets dereliction.
Absolutely, it does. And then, but also bringing activity and bringing a sense of what I call multicultural space into the city that lives and feeds off itself, if you know what I mean. critical. But it is something that there's a lot of partners in, a lot of people committed to, and I think will happen over time.
So, Willie, now, apart from me applying for a job as an economist down there, if you probably need one, because I quite fancy coming down here, we'll do a sort of adjunct professor job, that, and we'll do like 2 weeks, close, end of May is kind of nice, When you think about the university, and you think about your ambition, you think, what do you think the college is going to look like?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question first because it's something that I'm passionate about. We've 8,000 students here. Yeah. I'll answer your question through this. This city needs to embrace those students. First thing you need to do, and it's about dereliction, we need to embrace the concept of a university city. The young people who come to the university are dynamic, innovative, creative people. We need to embrace them. They're multicultural, actually. We've got students from all over the world. We need to embrace them. So the first thing I would ask the city is to declare itself as a university city, because then you bring young people into the city centre. And what I would love to see is to take 2 of those derelict buildings and open them up for young graduates who want to start a business, creative graduates. Give them a room for a year. Pay the overhead, give them some training, but don't do it just to be slightly different. Don't do it in engineering and science. Do it in the arts and do it in social studies, okay? And create this new entrepreneurial culture. With that will come the cafes. With that will come the theatres, not as beautiful as this, but other innovation. So to come back, what is the university? We have a university now because over the last 50 years, Waterford Institute of Technology pushed the boundaries, and we got beaten up for it. We did what we were not supposed to do. We did research when we weren't allowed to do research. We created new courses in areas that we were not allowed to create those courses in response to the needs of the region. So what I see in absolutely baseline for the university is that it's a university of international standing. And what I mean by that is that the best of breed is that the best research, the best teaching, the best education in Waterford is comparable with the rest of the world. And that connectivity is there. We already have part of it, that connectivity. But what I want to see most of all is that this is not an ivory tower outside of the city. It's the university will be a centre where the principles of all young people meeting their potential from an educational perspective. And that's something else we cannot lose. One of our key principles of the institutes and the RTCs before that was access. We need to ensure that we continue to provide access for students at all levels. Yeah. Because
and how is that going? Are there more students from poor backgrounds?
40% of our students come from non-traditional
that's really high.
backgrounds. That's very high.
It's really high.
A challenge, but it's something we're hugely proud of. There is nothing more satisfying than when you stand on at the graduation with a student and you see that confidence and you always recognize them. Their parents are in the audience. The middle class will always rush up to, because we do it in a church, okay? I know, well, it's no longer a church, but the church down in College Street. They'll rush up to get the photographs on the podium. The parents who have never had a child graduate will stand back.
Yeah.
And you go down to them and you say, would you like a picture with your son? And that too is what Waterford Institute of Technology was always about. And this city will actually grow and will provide leadership because we provide access to education to everybody. The old jobs are gone. We know that. So, people going into industry that were there before are not gone. But I just finished this thing about what I see as the vision of the university. What I see is that the university will produce graduates who will deliver into the economy innovation, creativity, and help the growth of us as a society. And from that, what I mean is that one of the things we want to do, and we've started to do, and the Zero Carbon Initiative is an example of the city and the college working together, is, you know, we talk about knowledge economy, we talk about creating new solutions in health, in transport, and etc. We should be applying them to the city.
Absolutely.
You know, so this has the potential of being the first city that embraces knowledge in a way that it's embedded in our society, whether in transport, whether in education, whether
using
it's
apps,
in
using technology.
Apps, technology. And we're small enough to do that, to make that commitment that we're going to be the first users of technology.
It's funny, because I think you're absolutely right, that small is a huge advantage in testing things, because big, it's cumbersome, and you talk about stakeholders and then you've got oppositions and everything. It's just funny you mentioned about the middle class kids and the photographs. I have a large family in Cork, and my granny had what we used to call in the family a bragging wall. And on the bragging wall, and I have triplet cousins who were referred to in their village as the three twins, right? So myself, because they couldn't get their head around triplets, you know? And myself and the three twins used to sit there, and my granny was a publican down the country. And the bragging wall, as our family moved from being, you know, small publicans to middle class families, this was just what we could gauge it, myself and the three twins, was how's Granny's bragging wall? And then there'd be photos of people with mortarboards, we'd never know who they were. Granny would find them in a sale of work or something, put them up and pretend they were cousins. But it's that idea that, you know, class is a funny thing, because it changes your perception of what you want to brag about. And you're absolutely right, lots and lots of people feel like, this is not really my world, and then it is. So I think the bragging wall is a very, very good social indicator. Every granny's, you can look at it usually over the telly, and there has to be something in Latin as well, which makes a huge point. Nobody understands. Can I just maybe, Ruth, give you the last word on this, because we are going to keep to time, and you've a huge and fascinating and varied program. We don't hog any more time. You're here, you're being benchmarked constantly, which I was just thinking must be quite angsty to, you know, constantly say, well, the people in Singapore are doing better than you. When you're in pharma, you're in industry, you're at this cutting edge, you're getting the graduates in, but you're also creating incredibly brilliant employees who possibly are then creating incredibly brilliant companies. You yourself have left the neck of the woods I'm from, you come down here. When you look forward, what do you see for pharma here? Because pharma, the one thing we know is we're all going to get old. And the one thing we know is as older people in wealthier countries like ourselves get old, we invest more in drugs. Okay? What do you see for pharma here?
I think that macro trends are very interesting, okay? So, I mean, if you look at out to 2040, the demographics look to be that Europe will actually decline in population, but with an increased number of migrants, okay? Which could be interesting for how will that change our business. You look at how we're going through, at this moment in time, the deglobalization, right?
Yeah.
And the challenges that bring and has brought around economic nationalism, essentially is where we've led. And then you look at the whole sustainability thing. So I think if you were to go back maybe 3 or 5 years ago, the metrics that we would have been measured against were certainly around competitiveness, cost, you know, and there was probably less of an influence on sustainability or our ability to provide drugs. Okay, and I think the last 2 or 3 years has taught the world a lot of lessons, and in pharma and in Europe, right, and in Ireland and therefore in Waterford, I think it's changed the profile about what is truly important, right?
Yeah.
What is truly important, what are governments looking for, and how we will do it. So for us, and I speak in the broader Sanofi, it is about developing that resilient supply chain, okay?
Yeah. So you can produce the stuff, but also you can get the right people coming here.
Correct.
Right.
And that is actually now where the energy is, probably with a different profile of what success looks like than it would have done 3 or 4 years ago.
So less balance sheet and more broad
Obviously,
sense.
you've got to optimize it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to optimize it. But we have a very clear purpose in Sanofi, and it is about, chasing the miracles of science to improve patients' lives. That is our role. It's very ambitious, okay? It's a fantastic purpose to be a part of, which is why a lot of young people actually join us now, because people...
Because it's a valuable thing to do.
It's a valuable thing to do, right? So, but for us, I think now, it's no good having great research and development on its own. You have to have the ability to convert that through a resilient pipeline to get it into patients' hands.
Well, we will leave it there on worthwhile pursuits. I mean, again, as somebody who doesn't know this part of the world, should know this part of the world more, it seems to me that there's really is, it's not so much an open goal, because nobody's an open goal, but there's enormous potential here. And the hardest thing, arguably, is to go from industrial to non-industrial. I mean, that's the hard transition, to go from being a neck of the woods that people thought, I'm not so sure about it, to a neck of the woods that kids want to go to, people want to go to. You can absolutely. Richie, go for it.
Would be George Foreman made a fair fortune in being hammered around the place. He made 100 times that in a frying machine.
That's very, very true. That is very, very true. On that note, okay, Willie, Ruth, and Richie, thank you all very much, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of Nicola.
Thanks very much indeed. Mind you, that frying machine, it probably needed a little bit more thought. There's no hinge, as in it just slaps down in your hand. You can't put it in the dishwasher. There's a lot of things. But he did sell a lot of them, and in fairness, it's really good. But if it's a torture machine, it can be as well if it falls on you. Anyway, I'm sure there's better bodies around here, and including in the enterprise board, that will take you through your idea and actually help you with it if you go into them with something like the George Foreman grilling machine. Anyway, that was really interesting, and I think one of the things that it's not that I want to add anything to it, but I think Willie Donnelly's assertion that we should embrace students, I think that's not going to be a problem, because the one thing that Waterford City has always been really good at is people coming in and kind of coming maybe for a couple of months or coming for a year on a contract from wherever, and they've ended up staying and settling. So I think that idea of embracing people and then diluting the gene pool, I think that's something that Waterford does very, very well, regardless of the environment that it's in, and it's done it historically as well. So I think it's all looking very good indeed. Right, our next title is Our Sustainable Future. And to lead this discussion, we couldn't have chosen better. Please welcome the Environment and Science Editor at the Irish Times, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan. Hi, Kevin. On the panel, we have Director of Services at Waterford City and County Council, Fergus Galvin. And of course, one of the jewels in our food and drink landscape has to be Ardkeen Quality Food Store. We're delighted to have Managing Director Colin Jeffson, and of course the Chief Executive of the Port of Waterford in the middle there, Frank Ronan. So I'll leave it to you guys.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and welcome to you all. And as flagged, this session we're going to have a chat about sustainability in the context of Waterford. And I think some of the speakers earlier touched on it. The relationship with the city and the county, I think, is really interesting from a sustainability point of view and from a climate action point of view. So we will explore that a little. And as you can see from above, I'm a science and environment editor with the Irish Times, but increasingly the words climate and sustainability force their way onto the table, and I think that those two particular issues are dominating my life at the moment, and I think that's necessarily the case. And I think Waterford is a good example of how people are beginning to embrace climate action in a really meaningful way. But I think I should also say that I'm not an imposter helicoptered in like adjunct Professor David McWilliams. I'm a native of Tramore who lived on Waterford's doorstep for many years, and actually I'm overcome with a sense of deja vu because I starred in a notable production of The High Chaparral on this stage as an 8-year-old, and I think my only line was to say, "Hands up." But just to echo what David was saying, this is a very special place, and it's great to see it live on in such a vibrant way. So on a more serious note, given our discussions now, my father worked for over 40 years in ACEC, which was a very significant manufacturing base here after Waterford Glass, always in second place, but it was critical to the electrification of Ireland. And he served in the city's interests as well through Waterford Chamber of Commerce. But even though he was a Cork man, he was a remarkable defender of Waterford and eager for its progress. And he noted always very approvingly each development or each good thing that happened in Waterford, as he featured in the Munster Express or the News and Star. And I think I inherited that from him, because coming back to Waterford and to Tramore in recent years, I've always been sort of very impressed by the way it has become a transformed place, and the city in particular has become a transformed cityscape, which I think is really notable. And you could almost sense the way it's moved up the livability index and culminated with the award that we're marking today, being the Irish Times Best Place to Live. So I think that's a good starting point. I think it's really significant as well, and I think this hasn't happened by accident, but the expansion of the city and the good things about it have been sort of extended throughout the county, and I think that's really indicated in the development of Dungarvan and in the renaissance of Tramore, even though I'm biased. But you can see the connectedness of the triangle, and in terms of development, business, manufacturing, tourism, food culture, and outdoor activities. And it's a good thing to say that you can sense the pursuit of sustainability and decarbonisation within that, which is really important, and that's going to feature in our discussion today. So to introduce our panel, I'm sure you all know them, but just to underline, firstly, we have Colin Jeffson of Arkeen Quality Food. I don't think we can dispute his green credentials, especially following his recent investment in solar PV at his famous outlet in the city. And then we have Fergus Galvin, Director of Services, Waterford City and County Council, whose brief includes environment and climate action. And I think it's fair to say the local authority is really making its mark in embracing sustainability, which we'll explore a bit more. And then we have Frank Ronan, who's Chief Executive of the Port of Waterford, and he is directing one of this country's most critically important ports. And very interesting recent development is its alliance with Rosslare, in that both are about to become, or hopefully will become, a key base for the development of offshore wind energy in Ireland, which I think is the really big climate action opportunity for Ireland, and that's for everyone in Ireland in coming decades. So I would like to initially just ask each of the panel to give a quick sort of overview of where they think the city is, and through their own particular perspective of their role, and also to maybe give a quick comment on the whole sustainability issue. So Colin, if you'd like to start.
Well, people will be familiar with our business, Arkeen Quality Food Store, to a greater or lesser extent, I suppose. It began by my parents over 50 years ago, and it has grown and changed, obviously, since then, and survived, which is in itself is, I think, a fair achievement in an environment dominated by big multinational industry operators. We've done that really by diversifying and playing to our strengths, I suppose. We've probably been on the ropes a few times, like the last panel alluded to, but at the same time, playing to our strengths. So it's a grocery shop, but really, it's become a community, by and large, in terms of our suppliers, and we focus hugely on local suppliers, local being Waterford, of course, southeast, very much in the southeast, and the rest of Ireland. And of course, we sell international brands as well, and speciality brands from all over the place, of course, as well. But we focus very much our attention on small-scale local producers, because that's where we find quality, and quality is always really important to where we are and to our customers. Quality in the product, quality in the provenance of the product, that people more and more want to know where did their product come from? You know, particularly if it's a fresh product, how did it get to the shelf in the shop? Who is behind it, and what was the practices, and so on and so forth, in terms of the environment, you know, and whether it's organic, free range, and all of that is more and more important to people. And that's not just, that hasn't suddenly become important. That's been a trend for 20 years or more, you know, so that's important. And we have developed relationships with many suppliers over the years. We don't really see ourselves as just buying their product and putting it on the shelf. We want to engage with our suppliers to support their product in whatever way we can. So that's why we haven't been able to do much of it in the last 2 years, but we're back now doing a series of meet the maker tastings in store, where the producer will come in, meet their customer. They love doing that. Customers love to see the person that is behind it. So our customers, our suppliers, our staff, of course, it's all a community, and it works really well to that extent. So I think that's a sort of a sustainable community in itself, I think, you know.
Very much so, yeah.
And that forms part of then, I think that's a helpful part in terms of Waterford and how sustainable is Waterford at the moment, because I think that's a little sort of microcosm, if you like, of a community that will work and that is self-sustaining and supportive of the different aspects.
Very much
you know,
so.
And of course, obviously, we completely encourage people to shop local, and we do that by presenting as best we can the range of local products and so on, and that people spend money in the economy, and that becomes circular, and that's vital, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, you're too polite to say, but I think you are an exemplar in the sustainability context within Waterford. So that's it's out there, and it's very obvious. So well done on that. Fergus, if you'd like to give a quick sort of overview from your perspective.
Sure, Kevin, yeah. And I was just reminded by one of your comments there a moment ago when you said that your focus and a lot of your agenda has changed over the last couple of years to climate action and that whole focus on the climate agenda. And pretty much I could probably very much echo that myself, in that in the council I'm responsible for 3 briefs: transportation, environmental services and water. And over the last couple of years, up to a couple of years ago, that was all about maintaining the infrastructure, you know, keeping the water flowing through the taps, sweeping the streets, keeping the parks nice and clean, the beaches, and keeping the roads free of potholes and all of that kind of thing. And it's what's been, when I sit back now and reflect in the last couple of years, what's really noticeable is the entire focus of everything we do is now shifting towards the green agenda. Some of it we're driving ourselves, some of it has been driven by national and EU level change and regulation and otherwise. And we've embraced a lot of that, and we're looking to move forward. And that cuts across a huge array of stuff. I mean, from the transportation side of things, it's the whole active travel agenda. It's about trying to, and we have a very significant budget of circa around 24 million euro this year from the National Transport Authority to drive forward new cycle measures, new bus transport, new bus priority measures, new walking facilities and so forth across the city and county. Into the environmental services side of it, it's around that whole climate action agenda. We're currently out recruiting for a new team to lead that particular agenda for us and to drive that agenda forward for us over the next 15 to 20 years. And even on the water services side, it's not so much today about getting the water through taps, which is equally important, but that is, I suppose, is transferring over to the Irish water, but it's looking at our natural waters, looking at the quality of the water in our rivers, our lakes, our estuaries, our seas, and so forth, and seeing how we can, I suppose, arrest the decline in the quality of those waters and bring about improvement and bring a better status into those. So it's very much all of our focus is changing, and I suppose from a strategic point of view, we've decided to become, we've looked at this, say, with both our council and at senior management level, and we've, I suppose, agreed various strategies from our climate change adaptation strategy a couple of years ago to more recently, say 12 months ago, we'd have brought forward a proposal to make the entire city carbon neutral by 2040 as part of the government's decarbonising zones.
Yeah,
and
we'll come back to that particular issue, but that's
so the focus is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Frank?
Kevin, I think the port story is a bit like a subset of Fergus's story, and I'm happy don't have to do a whole city, a whole county. Port is nice. So the port is a servant, I think, of an economy. It's a servant of society, a facilitator of economic activity. If you had come out to the port 6-7 years ago, we would have had to sit around the boardroom and had a chat about tons. We're good at tons and TUs. TUs are 20-foot equivalent units, containers, and money, and depths, and stuff, and keys, and things like that. And if you come out and talk to us now, we'd have the same conversation about those things are still important, but we'll have it in the context of an environmental strategy. We'll have it in the context of knowing what our carbon footprint is. We'll have it in the context of having a real interest in ecology, heritage, etc. So the cultural conversation, the values conversation, even in a small estate company has turned itself inside out over the last 6 years. Some of that is dictated from the centre. The Department of Transport didn't ring me up and say, Frank, would you ever mind reducing your carbon footprint by 50% by 2030 if you can manage it? We got a dictate. It's not nice to have. It's do it, and it doesn't really matter if our business increases 50%. The numbers are absolute, and that's fine. So we've got a plan for that, and we could see that coming. So we've developed a strategy, and we've had to learn a whole new language. In a way now, trying to teach people how to think in kilowatts now rather than just tons and money. And measure stuff differently and look at the world differently. So we're in the same place in that. So I suppose the climate and the climate, how we address that is happening at a global level, it's happening at a national level, it's happening at a county and city level, it happens at state body level, institution level, and it has to come down to the individual. State bodies will be driven out in front because we can be exemplars in that, and I think that's a really positive place to be. But how we get the message right for the individuals is going to be a phenomenal challenge for us over the next few years.
So listen, then, your new sort of frontier, I should say, in terms of offshore energy, how do you see Waterford Port playing its part in that, and how is it going to relate to Rosslare?
Am I glad you asked that, or am I terrified you asked that? I'm not sure. It's the kind of the meaty question of the moment. I'm going to present it. I want to sound, Waterford. We thought a lot about where we sit in the world and what we can do and what our strengths are and how we can contribute to the agenda. And we got to a place where we said, we actually have to start being honest here. And I'm in a Waterford room here, it's dangerous, but we actually took off the Dacia jersey, and even we take off, sometimes we wear the black and amber jersey, depends on what room we're in. We're a little bit agnostic. But we had to kind of get very honest, and the offshore realm is a place where there's been a lot of noise about ports not stepping up to the mark, for a number of years, and there's been a lot of distraction over the last couple of years, and very personal frustration. But we just recognised early on that this is not for us, that bringing a 200-metre long, 50-metre wide craft up to Bellevue, we wouldn't get it past Duncannon, it gets stuck in the river, and if you've got it up there, in actual fact, you block the whole place and everything come to a stop. So this wasn't for us. So we had to kind of bring an honesty to this. Now, it's a bit hard to swallow because I'm a business guy and I like making money and I like investing in doing things. But we had to kind of put the hand up and say, in actual fact, the place for this is Rosslare. It's on the coast. It's not in an SAC. It's not in a special protected area. So their consenting regime, the environmental regime, the access to the waters, etc., this needs to happen there. So we've kind of called that out. And then we've been very clear about what our own place in the world is. Behind that, people talk about 5 gigawatts of offshore energy on the Irish Sea over the next 5 years, 2030. People forget to talk about the 3.5 gigs of onshore energy that needs to be serviced and facilitated, in the same period of time. So Waterford's role in the next 5, 6, 7 years is to facilitate a really big chunk of that 3.5 gigs. So number one, really important. It's a phenomenal piece, and we need to do it. We also need to support Rosslare and whatever other port in supporting supply ships, cable layers, offshore on maintenance
that's
activities.
where you come in. Then,
so we will come in. It's not as high end, and it won't cost 200 million quid as an investment. To be more modest than that. But again, I think the issue is bigger, Kevin, here than us fighting for our patch. We have to take kind of a national picture of this and say, look at what can we really contribute here and be realistic about it. Because if we don't do that, we're actually getting in the way and we're confusing the conversation. Right. But that can attract a bit of a bit of ire.
But sure, I'm assuming there will be some degree of offshore development off the Waterford coast.
There will. And it's about where the construction ships are serviced from that, and we will get plenty of business from that. And we will, but it's not about business. Business is kind of an enabler. The commercial conversation is the enabler, to make the right things happen. So it's about about making money. If you make money, you can invest in your facilities. Invest in facilities, you can actually support the activity. So there's so it's don't get confused about the commercial piece in this. It's about trying to see what needs to happen. And how we can help or how we can play our role in that and being clear about it.
Okay. So in terms of setting the right ambition then and in terms of sustainability targets, I think the city has a very interesting example which you can illustrate in the sense of climate action. There are the parts of the country that are scaling up climate action in small pockets of 5,000 people, but Waterford City Council decided to do it on a citywide basis. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, that's right, Kevin.
And that was a big step. And how are you going to deliver on that?
With great difficulty, I suppose. It's a short answer. But but I suppose going back a little over 12 months ago, the government launched a scheme for an initiative, and they decided that every local authority should have a decarbonising zone within its within its remit. And the idea of this was that decarbonising zone would effectively advance a whole range of technologies, a whole range of interactions with the community, a whole range of things that would drive the carbon neutral agenda between now and 2040, with the view to becoming largely carbon neutral over that what is now probably an 18-year period. And we got this, and we kicked it around inside, and we said, okay, you could, I suppose, tick the box in this in some respects, and maybe take a relatively small rural area of maybe 4 or 5 square kilometres, or one of our smaller towns and villages, and use that as the exemplar. And then we said, no, why not be a bit more ambitious? Let's do something unique in this space. And after kicking it around a bit and thinking about what's involved in it, we said, okay, we'll do the entire city of Waterford, which is, 55,000 people, and we'll use that as the exemplar, and we will try and reach a space where Waterford will become the first carbon neutral city in the country. So
that's a big ambition.
It was a big ambition, and we did a lot of work with our colleagues in which is now set to, in terms of how we'd express that, and also with colleagues in the Chamber of Commerce and otherwise, and to see what would that look like. And it's a huge. I mean, when you sit down and you say, God, how do you get to that space? Like it's enormous when you sit down and you look at it. But I mean, it's like everything else. You've got to break it down into a series of 4 or 5 different streams and start breaking that down into other individual streams. Like if you took one example, say for instance, if you take transport as an example, like transport currently in the city is our single biggest emitter of CO2 and greenhouse gases. Okay, it's probably accounts for about a third. The city emits roughly about 400,000 tonnes of carbon every year within the boundary of the city. About a third of that comes from transport. That's for cars, vans, trucks, motorbikes, whatever. So how do you reduce that by 10%, 20%, 40%, 80, 90%?
Big ask.
It's a huge ask. You do it. You start looking at the small bits of it. Once at the small bits, these are big interactions at one level. It's you create. And you look at the whole active travel side of things. You create more facilities for people to cycle. You look at your bus networks. You look at your walking networks. You look at, and you create, I suppose, the carrots, if you like, to enable and encourage people to I suppose, to choose active travel, or to choose, I'll cycle to work now this morning. I'll let the kids walk to school. I might take the bus in, because there are now more bus services there now than there were 2 or 3 years ago. And you start breaking it down, and you also look at things like how do you have to, I suppose, acknowledge that at a level, not everybody's going to do that. Not
it's about choice.
It is about choice, but it's about creating that choice and making that choice sufficiently attractive for people at one level. But also, I suppose, on the other side of it, you have to make the current ways of travel a little bit more discommodious, I suppose, in terms of, because I mean, if you take any, like we can't build more roads in the city centre. We can't build new streets. We can't, if we want to put in, let's say, a bus lane or a cycle lane, we have to take a bit of space away and redistribute space that's currently used by motor transport to cycling, buses, walking, or whatever.
Right.
So you have that, I suppose, conundrum and that little bit of that, some of those awkward conversations that we need to have with people over the next number of years in terms of how you achieve that.
And I'm assuming community buy-in is critical. And how are you going to go about that?
It's probably one of the most critical issues that's there at the moment. And it's interesting, I've tuned into a lecture last night. The EPA have run a series of climate change lectures, and they had a Yale professor over last night to give a talk on community engagement in the climate action agenda, a guy called Dr. Tony Leverwitz. I'm not too sure if I pronounced that correctly. And he has done a lot of survey work with the EPA over the last couple of years in community engagement, community attitude, and so forth. And I suppose there are a couple of key points that came out of it. At the moment, and this was demonstrated very, very forcibly this week, where Ireland is currently facing a huge energy crisis with respect to Russian oil and gas and all of that. And the conversation in the country for the past week has been dominated by turf.
Incredible.
Which is used by probably a tiny percentage of people. The government was going to fall 2 days ago, the whole lot. And I suppose part of what came out of the lecture last night was that the agenda is often driven by a very small but very vocal minority of the population. And it's how do you change the space from that minority to equally establishing another minority who will be equally vocal and equally would form, I suppose, that leadership role and start talking, creating that agenda around climate action. And that I think is where we need to get to.
I think you put your finger on it. Colin, in terms of your customers and your discerning customers, to what extent are they fully embracing that sustainability, or is it tokenism, or is it, they like the feel-good side of it, but are they committed in terms of their purchasing, in terms of their lifestyle? Can you sense what's you're facing in terms of your...
Well, it's a spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
People have their own priorities and they act accordingly, I suppose. So I think it's important for our customers that we are, as an entity, as an organisation, doing our best, doing our part to be as sustainable as possible with, well, you mentioned the PV panels, which on a good long day are providing most of our electricity needs, which is great, and doubly great at the moment with the price has gone mad. But also packaging, of course, and we obviously, as far as possible, provide all recyclable or compostable packaging and so on, and we encourage our suppliers to do so. And so we have greater or lesser extent along those lines, depending on how big they are and how well able they are. But it comes down to people making their own choices, and I'm sure, as Fergus kind of understands this very much. We are essentially selfish creatures, I think, aren't we? So we will do something. We will make a choice as long as it's not
too inconvenient.
Creating a problem for us, and that's as you mentioned, the kind of that balance, the tension between where we're trying to get to and where people are. And people are, if they're comfortable where they are, they resist moving along. So they have to be convinced, I suppose, in a wider scale, encouraged, and sometimes a little bit of coercion, I guess.
Very much so.
And that's
so
the
tell
way it
me,
is.
broadening that a little in terms of fellow business people around the city, to what extent do you feel they get the sustainability thing? To what extent do you think they're changing? Or are they knocking on your door saying, what are you doing? Or what sort of interaction do you have on
everybody? I think everybody, well, nearly everybody is looking at this. It's on everybody's agenda to say, what can we do to climate change and other environmental issues like biodiversity and so on. It's an important issue for everybody. Certainly, all people that we engage with have it uppermost in their minds. It's a thing to take into account, and just like us, when we're making decisions, we try and take that into account, and sometimes you can do something that you're very happy. It works very well environmentally and sustainability, and sometimes it's not possible. You just have to compromise and do your best. But where you can do your best, that's the right thing to do. Right. And I think most people are following that.
Sure, that's the good thing, yeah. Related to that, I think, as an outsider, so to speak, coming back in to the city and county, I sense there is a genuine food culture there, whether it's in terms of food outlets, restaurants, manufacturing of, as you say, local products and both food and drink. Do you think that's taken root, or is it, at the initial stages of it? It's certainly getting a strong profile in terms of Waterford. How do you react to that? Do you think it's the real deal in terms of a new way of embracing food and drink?
Yeah, I think we're making good progress, steady progress there. I think that's one of those sort of long-term trends that has shown to be quite resistant to economic issues and other issues in a way. There are many. There's different aspects to it. There are many great restaurants in Waterford, Tramore, Dungarvan in particular, and the key thing about those restaurants, I think, that makes people that they're doing and kind of leading, and people want to see is on their menus there will always be local products, locally grown products. People, their customers want to see that, and these restaurants, I don't want to kind of mention them all, and who I'll miss out, but all the great ones that there are, and food outlets around, and they're interesting, and they're good now, and sort of topical now because of their buy-in to local, their emphasis on what's good in the locality and what's seasonal, and that's what people are looking for. So from that point of view, that's encouraging, and of course then that feeds back into local suppliers and people starting to see how they can add value. Maybe typically from a farming background, to see how can we turn this milk into something that we can sell, even some of it, that we can sell directly to the customer in terms of in a market or into a shop or into a restaurant or something like that. And we depend on that because we want to see more and more of that coming through, and new products, and it makes it interesting,
Absolutely.
And then if they get enough support, then more will do it, and that's. Yeah. But we still have the big guys, and we need the big guys as well,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just in terms of getting the mix right, then, Frank, in terms of physical infrastructure, and I think you'd be good to feed in on this. Obviously, the move down to Bellevue changed the whole city mix, and strategically, I think it was the right thing to do. And I think
where's David McWilliams?
What about completing the picture? And I know you're probably not directly involved, but what's your outsider view on the North Quays, for example? I know it's an area that's crying out for redevelopment, and there's been stop-start proposals, and we're not sure yet what's the likely scenario. But how do you view all that in terms of a major part of Waterford City?
The transference of the port downriver 25 years ago was a natural evolution, driven by ship sizes and requirements for transport, and it was the right thing to do at the time, and went to the right place. I would have a very, I think we're happy that the city bought the site. We're happy that it needs to become part of the city. and we just wish it well, and we look forward to seeing it, seeing the new bridge and seeing, that part of the city develop. It clearly needs to go that way. So we've no issue with that.
Right.
We just will think positive about it. We just want to make sure the rail freight line that's going through it doesn't get too interrupted when they're building it. Because that's, so that's another part of the thing, the Alliance is trying to get that kind of west of Ireland rail freight flowing into Bellevue is really important.
Right.
So more trains, more activity. So you're asking about pricing. So we would find in our markets that even though we're offering lower carbon solutions and closer shipping solutions, and really at the end of the day, for the last several years, money speaks. We're now seeing a change. I think Vladimir Putin is going to win the European gold medal for changing the whole outlook on Europe's decarbonisation. It's terribly unfortunate, but this particular crisis is actually working in favour of the right actions being taken.
Sure.
Whereas the last couple of crises were disastrous because they stopped. Brexit stopped us thinking about the right things.
Yeah.
COVID stopped us, dealing with climate. So I think at least this, it's awful. But the right conversations are happening, and the right energy and the right crisis mentality is coming into play.
Very much so. Yeah. So, Fergus, you might be in a good position to give us a reflection of the city and county in terms of infrastructure. What's envisaged now. I know the Greenway is the great sort of beacon there on the sort of Waterford landscape. Is it, like, for example, is it proposed that would expand at some stage or be extended? Or
yeah, absolutely, Kevin. And for anybody who would driven into the city this morning from the Kilkenny side, you'd have seen a lot of work ongoing around Bilberry, around the opposite Bridge Hotel there, and that's part of about a €7 million extension of the Greenway. Because one of the things, I suppose, that we realised, and Richie would have spoken about it there at the earlier session, is that the Greenway had a transformative effect on Dungarvan and a place like Kilmac, but the city didn't really reap the benefit from it. And our current project is to bring the Greenway right into the heart of the city centre.
Fantastic.
So we're working on this very exciting project at the moment. We'll have it finished and open by this time next year. And that will bring a really high quality cycle network all the way in as far as the city centre and finish off the link. But I suppose that's not the end of the story. We are looking at a lot more. Like we're currently doing feasibility study, or not feasibility studies. It's an options report to bring a Greenway from Tramore all the way in as far as the city centre as well.
Delighted to hear that.
And we have elements of that in place already, but we just need to join up the dots and do a little bit more work on it. Okay. And similarly, we're currently engaged in doing a feasibility study on extending the Greenway beyond Dungarvan and back out towards the western boundary of the county and into Cork. So from a Greenway perspective, there's a lot, and that is, as was referenced earlier on, is joining up the county and creating that sense of purpose, that singular sense of purpose, if you like, which is very important in that space.
Can I just ask you, Fergus, because of the success of the Greenway, just recognised by everybody, I think, are you finding the proposals to extend it east and west easier to get through because people can see the value of it?
Absolutely. And it has made it an awful lot easier. I mean, as was spoken about earlier on, there were a lot of hurdles to overcome. I mean, anytime you change something, you bring something new in, people are obviously cautious. In some cases, they're afraid and whatnot. But having seen the success and the benefits, it's become far easier, and you see it all over the country at this stage. Everybody wants a Greenway at this stage,
But I think it's a good way of broadening the climate conversation in terms of not just sustainable tourism, but other green choices. And as you were citing earlier, on the transport and active travel side, so it serves its purpose in a very broad way.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we did last year, and it was a very simple but huge and relatively cheap in the overall scheme of things, we created about 3.2 kilometres of walkway along the river shore around Ballinkill in towards the city centre. Very low, spent about 500,000 or so on it, and huge impact. But again, it was about creating that, I suppose, an alternative. It connected up a number of communities along the way, created a sustainable both a leisure facility for people and equally that bit of connectivity between the hospital and residential estates and even where Colin is based there in Arkeen Stores. So it's and there's a lot more of that we need to do and that we have plans to do over the coming years.
Very good. So we're coming to the end of our session here, but one final thing maybe to apply the future lens. So each of you might just give a quick view of what you think is going to happen to Waterford over the next 10, 15 years and what Is there some element that you would like in particular to be pursued? So maybe we'll start with you, Frank, on that.
Again, we're working in a port. It's very defined, I suppose, set of plans for the next 20 years. Very public. So the good thing about being a public body is, in whatever a state-to-state company is we don't have secrets. So I mean, everybody will know exactly what our corporate plan is. We know exactly what our corporate objectives are. We know where the sustainability sits. We know what our infrastructure plans are for the next 20 years, and there's some brave plans there, and we will spend 150 million euros in the next 20 years, meeting the needs. But there is huge challenges out there in terms of actually kind of dealing with the consenting, permissioning, trying to do the right thing, trying to actually have that proper discussion between the environmentalist and the builder or the developer, and say, look, how do we actually have society? Meet the needs of society, but still respect the requirements of ecology. So there's a phenomenal challenge in all of that, and I think it's one that needs to be thought about a lot. We don't regard ourselves as having any right to do anything any place, but we're trying to find what we can do and what we should do, and getting there is very, very difficult.
Yeah, well, I think you're in a sensitive area in terms of ecology and meeting the three rivers there, but you've already sort of underlined how important that is, so that's a good thing for the future. Fergus?
I'd like to see Waterford and Waterford City, I suppose in particular, as being the green capital of Ireland.
Yeah.
In every aspect. I mean, it's from Colin would have spoken about the food and the offering and so forth, and the provenance and all of that goes with that, but also across all sectors of society, that we've gotten to a place where we've managed to bring the majority of the people with us in terms of recognising what we need to do, engaging in that whole piece in terms of whether it's looking at their transport choices, looking at how they heat their homes and what measures that can be undertaken in that, looking across at business, working with our colleagues in business and in the college and so forth in achieving those aims. So, but I mean, ultimately, I think the goal will be that Waterford will have, I think it was Dave McWilliams might have mentioned it earlier on, can you find one thing that you can hang on and brand yourself and find one thing of difference and of scale? And I think that's what we'd like to see, where we'd like to see ourselves.
Great aspiration for the future. And Colin?
I think I'd be very optimistic, really, about where Waterford can go in the next 10 or 20 years. We have great natural amenities, just from the coast and the mountains and the fertile land, and from a food culture point of view, that just provides the basis for that. So, and I see the trend then of people engaging with our own food production, not just Waterford, but of course the southeast as well. And we need to remember, I suppose, that part of our strength is that we are seated here in the southeast, surrounded by wonderful counties as well as just ourselves. And I think that Waterford often feels we've been kind of a bit bypassed by central government and so on in many ways. But that has. It's the George Foreman thing, I suppose. It kind of that in a way that's kind of made us look to ourselves and to see, well, what can we do for ourselves? And it's probably, in a way, partly because of that, I think we probably have one of the most proactive and progressive councils in the country. And it's wonderful to hear Fergus here talking about the ambition towards a zero carbon city in the next 15 years or so. And I'm conscious that a lot of things need to happen for that to happen, and they're not all within our own control, that we need the national government to buy into that, and there's signs of the right conversations happening at the moment. But if everything goes well, that kind of ambition, I think, can be realised, and it'll need all the cooperation that our community can muster.
Well, I think it's fair to say it's a pretty bold ambition, because knowing the hard graft that's required in climate action myself every day, to be putting that up in lights is pretty impressive. And I think already from today we have evidence of the degree of cooperation that is needed to make that happen. So I think that's a great way of facing into the future. So listen, we've come to the end of this session. Thank you very much to all of you for adding to today's discussions in a really meaningful way. We appreciate it. And just to echo, I had nothing to do with Waterford winning this great prize, but it's just, when I heard it, that they had won the best place to live, I said it was the right decision. I knew immediately it was the right decision. So congratulations to all. So thank you very much. We're going to have a great week.
Thanks very much indeed. Hey, you're free to go. You're free to go. Thanks very much indeed. Again, as I said, we are going to take a little break, but we have 2 more sessions after the break. And if you are a panelist in the next 2 sessions, if you could come backstage now, it would be great to get your microphone on. But for everybody else, please go enjoy a cup of coffee, stretch the legs, and we're back here in about 25, 30 minutes. Thank you. And you're very welcome back. I hope you had a nice coffee and pastries, I believe, are out there. I didn't see them, but there you go. Somebody might drop one back to me. Right, so we're moving on. We've got 2 more sessions now. The next one, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. It's culture, community, and connectedness. Now, Kevin mentioned that he was from Tramore, but actually we have a real Waterford City woman to facilitate this next panel. Please welcome columnist with the Irish Times and Waterford woman, Jennifer O'Connell.
Hi everybody. I'm not going to do a long preamble, so I'll get my lovely panellists to come out and join me. This is Catherine Collins, and Catherine is the project manager with Waterford Cultural Quarter. This is Camilla, my friend and the director of Momo Restaurant. and TV Honan, who's the director of the Spree Festival. I'm sure you all know TV. So it's lovely to be back. I was trying to think this morning as I was getting ready, have I ever been on the stage in the Theatre Royal in my entire life? And much to my mum's disappointment, I don't think I ever did make it up here. But I am a Waterford woman. I grew up here. I grew up in pre-McDonald's Waterford, as I like to think of it. And I thought it was the absolute arse end of the planet. And I couldn't wait to get out. I remember we were talking last night, myself and Kevin O'Sullivan were talking about, I don't know if any of you are even old enough to remember the smell of the cattle along the quay in Waterford in the late 1980s when they were boarding the boats to Libya, I think it was. So that's the kind of Waterford that I remember, and I couldn't wait to leave. And I have to say that nobody was more surprised than me to find myself moving back here in 2016 with a Dublin-born husband and 3 children who'd just spent most of their lives in Australia and California. And people thought, I kind of knew exactly what I was doing, and I was looking at Waterford with fresh eyes, and I was very sure that this was going to be a great city to raise my family. And so it has proven 6 years on, we're incredibly happy. But when I came back that summer, I didn't intend to stay, but I looked around and I couldn't believe the difference in the city, from the place that I had grown up. I found it was so much more physically beautiful than I remembered. It is such a vibrant city. There's so much going on here. The people, the community, for me, it's all about the community and the people. I think we're really a warm and welcoming city and county. And the size of it, the scale of Waterford is one of the things that I took for granted completely when I was growing up. In fact, I hated the scale of it. I wanted it to be way, way bigger. But I love the fact now that you can get in your car in the middle of the city centre and you can be on a beach in 10 minutes and you can be in the mountains in half an hour or maybe a little bit more than that. But one of the things that struck me when I came back in 2016 was how many people were really shocked that I would leave. First of all, we lived in Dublin and then we lived in Australia and California, and that I would leave those exotic places and come to live in Waterford. And they really, a lot of people would say to me, "Are you sure? And good luck, and how are the kids adjusting?" And I think at that stage, we still had a little bit of that lingering inferiority complex that I think, we had a little bit about Waterford growing up, that we felt, I think this county took some blows, and while we're really resilient people, I do think that there was a lingering feeling that maybe other parts of Ireland were doing better, other counties that will remain nameless this morning get everything and Waterford gets nothing. But I have to say that I think that has waned over the last 6 years, and I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think we've finally let that go, and we're really embracing everything that the city and the county has to offer. And this award, I think, for me, was one of those moments when I really realised that. Because, and by the way, even though loads of people texted me and thanked me after Waterford won the best place to live in Ireland, I had nothing to do with it. It was completely, I wish I had that kind of power. I was as surprised and delighted as everybody else. But I don't think people were surprised. When I talked to people about it, I think they said, yeah, the secret's out now, Waterford is the best place to live in Ireland. And I wanted to ask you guys about that. Catherine, were you surprised, honestly, when you heard that Waterford had been nominated the best place to live?
I wasn't surprised at all, actually. I suppose I'm a bit of a blow-in. I've been here 20 years from Cork originally. And when I moved down here, I immediately thought this was a beautiful city. I suppose I work in the libraries, the arts, the culture, so I'm seeing the very positive side of it through that angle. But the laneways and the streets and the heritage is very, very evident here, and it's very, very accessible, very easy to reach. I do think Waterford as a city is like an outdoor platform for the arts and for culture, and it's just very evident here. So for me, this was no surprise. But when I moved here, people, a little bit like you moving back, "Oh, what are you coming to Waterford for? Should we be moving on again?" And I was like, no, this is beautiful. And bringing people to Waterford, bringing visitors to Waterford, everybody, like I've brought lots of Europeans here for European projects and everything. They're all, "Oh my God, this is like a hidden treasure." But I think the Waterford people found it more surprising than the rest of us.
Yeah. And TV, you won't have been surprised, I don't think. I don't imagine. But do you sense what I have sensed, that we are gaining in confidence, and that over the last 5 or 6 years, or maybe the last 10 years, Waterford has really begun to see, and the people of Waterford have really begun to see the things that there are in this city and this county?
Yeah, I remember many years ago, I had a conversation, or I got a summons at the time from the city manager at the time, and his problem was, or what was on his mind was that he had the latest census figures. And at that time, what was particularly worrying him was that the Galway figure showed 60% in white-collar employment and 40% in blue-collar employment, and Waterford was exactly the opposite, to a percentage point. And his point was, well, what am I going to do with this place? Do you know? And I said, you embrace what it is. You don't try to change it. And, you know, all these years later, I was interested to hear Ruth Beadle making the same point earlier on this morning. Do you know, we shouldn't be kind of striving to be the next Limerick. We shouldn't be striving to be the next Galway. We shouldn't be striving to be the next anywhere, except ourselves. We should be just striving to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. And I think the award is an external signal to that. I mean, let's be honest about it. Irish Times journalists aren't noted for being pushovers. They're sceptical by nature. They investigate things. Do you remember the old Bible story about putting the hand in the wound of Jesus just to prove that he was dead? Do you know what I mean? Like, journalists tend to be like that. They need to put their hand in the wound just to check which way is up. So when a group of independently minded journalists covering a range of topics of life, from kind of housing to infrastructure, whatever, come, look, measure, evaluate a whole bundle of places and say, you know what, lads, of all the places we've seen, this is actually the best one. So I think we should really kind of embrace that and not be self-conscious about it.
Yeah. And for me, Camilla's story actually encapsulates some of the things about Waterford, the way that you kind of stumbled on it. So we'll take a little digression for a minute while you tell us how you ended up here in 2004, I think it was.
2004. So I spent the summer in 2003 in Dublin, and I remember walking around Dublin thinking, yeah, I can live here. It's okay. It's not as that wet and not as that windy. And then I finished my master's in Poland, and I decided to move to Ireland. And just 2 weeks before, I turned around to my Polish boyfriend at that time, and I told him that I don't want to go to Dublin. So he was like, okay, so where do you want to go? And I was like, I don't know. So there was a Lonely Planet, and I was going through the cities. I didn't go to the very small place because obviously employment was very important, but I really was looking for a fresh start, for place where nobody knows me, when I don't have any connections, when I'm not following Polish community just because it's gonna be easier. I just wanted somewhere fresh. And Waterford looked in this Lonely Planet book like it's on the coast. So when I arrived here, I genuinely was looking for Barcelona kind of effect, you know? I was looking for the sea in the city, and I was really disappointed in a way. And I remember as well, coming from Poland, which is over 40 million people, and reading about Waterford, that it's fifth of the biggest cities in Ireland. It took me a couple of days to realize that that's it. It's nothing else there. You know, it's actually much smaller than what I would be used to, big cities in Poland. But very, very quickly, Waterford welcomed me. And I never experienced in my life, and as a child I moved a lot around Poland, I never felt at home so quickly. And I remember working in Jeff's bar and living in the Glen. Every day in that very short distance walk, I would have to say hello to at least 2 or 3 people. And people did know my name, and they were lovely and they were helpful. And actually during the summer before the Waterford won the best place to live, I voted for Waterford, and I really meant it because I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. And you know, when you are a blow-in, and when you look at people from Waterford living here, they often don't appreciate what they have. Because for us, the grass is always greener. There is always a better place with, I don't know, better climate, more rain, less rain, better employment. But in the end of the day, for me, it's the quality of life I have here, people I have around. Of course, I would like more sunny days and, you know, maybe a little bit more excitement in the city. But in the same time, it's so close to go to Dublin or Cork. And it's so much going on in Waterford itself that you can have all of that here. So why would you go somewhere else? You know,
I completely agree with that. And I have to say, actually, 6 years after we moved back, you know, people ask me, do you ever regret it or have second thoughts or wish you'd kept the house in Dublin and gone back to Dublin? And I have to say, not once, not for one day ever. You know, it's been a great experience. It's a great place to raise a family. one of the really appealing things for me about living in Waterford is what's going on in the cultural space and in the artistic space. And I wanted to get both of you to talk a little bit about that. Maybe we'll start with you, Catherine. Tell us, first of all, for people who don't know, what the cultural quarter is and you know, what we're going to see coming out of there over the next months and years.
So I suppose the cultural quarter in many ways is a vision. It's an idea, but is also very practical, and it's the O'Connell Street area of the city, which is huge heritage, really important part of the city, industry, enterprise. There was ships coming up the port, you know, and offloading, and people referencing the cattle and all of that. Massive social history to that part of the city. So we're capturing all of that, and yesterday we launched a Quaker Trail and a series of 16 films done by Waterford Youth Arts, all about that heritage. And then building on the steps of that, very multicultural, diverse part of the city. There's far more people from new communities living in that part of the city than in other parts of the city. So lots of languages and lots of different cultures coming into the city there. So what we're looking at is urban regeneration, and urban regeneration means something maybe slightly different to a planner or a roads person or an engineer, but the city, and I think it's a great vote of confidence in our arts and culture scene, the City Council has decided to look at our urban regeneration through the lens of culture. And to me, that is such a confidence in the arts and culture sector that we have here. And again, it's something we need to be shouting loudly about, what TV and Spree have brought to the city, and building on the back of that then with our mural arts, and then, you know, the emerging art scene. And I know TV has Nest, and, you know, new and upcoming young people getting involved in the arts. So there's a really thriving arts community here. And then creativity. The panel earlier were talking about innovation and that space. That all needs creativity. So I think we have a huge opportunity here to invest in that. So we have funding through the Urban Regeneration Development Fund, which is around infrastructure and bringing a lot of the empty buildings in that part of the city back into reuse, and specifically around creativity and culture, and linking in with the new university, WIT as it was, to bring a lot of youth and innovation and bringing all that back in. So in a way, it's like a hub of creativity and culture is the vision for that, but not just for being in the city and for being part of the city. That's spread out to the county, the region and Ireland, and really I think enhancing our reputation, the reputation of Waterford nationally and internationally. I think there's huge opportunities there for us.
And TV, one of the things that I think Spree did so well was to bring art to the people and to democratise the experience of art and being part of, you know, an artistic community. Have you been heartened by what you've seen in recent years in terms of just the emerging little artistic hubs, and what are some of the most exciting things that you've seen happen?
Yeah, I think Waterford, like the place we're sitting in, is just like, there's a great tradition here of not just high art, but art of the people. You know, this is the room that things like Tops of the Town happened in. This is the room where things like Fail in the Scola happened in. This is the room where things like the musical societies happened. And while that mightn't be high art, it is art of the people. It's art that people of this place make to express themselves and to make their souls sing. And in a kind of a way, Spree is an extension of that tradition, except rather than it being in a building. And I think one of the things that I'm proudest of, and I think the organisation is proudest of, is that we're not just a festival that goes all over Europe and hires off at the shelf. We do that, but at the heart of Spree is Waterford people making their own street art. Like the parade is probably the biggest example of it, but there's lots of other ones, like the Sanofi kind of youth orchestra and lots of kind of other things. And mention of Sanofi kind of reminds me that, like, one thing I'm really passionate about just now, and I heard Willie Donnelly speaking about it earlier on as well. One of the things I'm passionate about just now is that the connection between creativity, art, and science. And, like, you know, I saw a quote this morning there, because I looked it up, of course. But the greatest scientists are artists as well, Albert Einstein said, you know. And it's true in reverse too. The greatest artists are scientists as well, because both are a process of experimentation to reach some place that you make people's lives better. And I think there's a great possibility here for Waterford that Willie touched on, maybe with the new university, of reuniting art and science here in Waterford. And that being a USP for us in terms of what this city is about. Because if you think about it, at the same time Leonardo da Vinci was painting the Mona Lisa, he was making sketches of helicopters and submarines and other things as well. Someplace along the way, science and the arts separated. And I think there's a great opportunity here in Waterford, given the tech companies we have here, the pharma companies we have here, both based on science, but the arts companies we have here as well, about those two clusters talking to each other and saying, hey, what can we do for each other that makes this a unique place, that brings out the creativity in the place, so that the science with the rigor of the examination and the research is coupled with making the imaginations work as well.
I love that idea. Catherine, what do you think the idea of Waterford as kind of the STEAM capital of Ireland? So you've got your science, technology, engineering, arts and media.
Absolutely. I think there's huge opportunities, and we would work quite closely with WIT in design, architecture, the arts, and then also with the economic kind of side of things and data collection. So we're looking at all of those disciplines, and there's huge opportunities there. Certainly with the students and the youth, but the arts and creativity fit into so many sectors that people don't naturally think they do fit into. So we have to embrace all of those opportunities. They're absolutely there, and I think around design in particular, and how design and designing cities and designing spaces work so well with our arts and culture and heritage offering, there's an enormous amount of synergy there, and it's just how do we explore that, how do we pull the best of that out. And I think with the range of people even in the room today, it's getting people chatting and talking and, as you know, collaborating and partnerships, bringing all of that conversation together. And Waterford being a small city, but yet a city, we have the university, we have the industry, we have the local government, and we have the community. So it's just how to start generating the conversation to make sure that arts and culture and creativity is seen as important as, if you like, the other aspects.
There are spin-offs from that as well, though, because like with Spree, behind the scenes, there's a lot of kind of what might be called R&D going on, arts development stuff, finding new talent, nurturing that talent, mentoring that talent. So with a lot of people kind of coming and going behind the scenes that are never in the news and SAR, never on WLR. And a lot of the time, for example, even though we don't know each other, we use Momo an awful lot when we have kind of guests in town, because it's just a really welcoming place, and they do their job really well there. So all the bits eventually join up. You know, that's the value of having such a hospitable place, because they can come to us and they can work all day, but when we take them out to give them a treat after all that work, it's lovely to show them another version of Waterford.
Yeah.
So the advantages are circular if we can get them right.
Yeah, and I think having lived in cities of different sizes myself, I think that's one of the things that we can do well in Waterford, because we can be a bit more agile about making things happen, because it's a smaller city and because there are connections happening all the time. So your doors are open, both of you, to people who might want to come and talk more about this idea of bringing the science and technology and arts together and creating something out of that. Yeah?
Oh, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I was just waiting for a commitment there, TV. TV's door is open. Camilla, while we're talking about sort of culture and one of the other big changes that I noticed in the years that I've been back is, the food community. Kevin was talking a little bit about this with his panelists, but the food community in Waterford has just exploded, and there are so many more options to eat now, and people who are really, and I think in a way, although maybe we've lost some businesses over the years, I think those that sort of stuck with it through COVID and are emerging out the other side are doing that because they're really passionate, and that passion is the reason why they're really successful. So we've got some really good news stories, I think, out of the food scene in Waterford recently. What excites you most,
I think it's altogether Waterford is a very, very welcomed place to be. So it brings people from all over the world, and we can explore and we can grow and we can find different flavors and we can learn from each other. And not every community give you that space. And when you look at people from other parts of the world, you know, Dvir in Meze, in Tramor, then we have a Kasia who makes the vegan pate. We have loads of people from other parts of the world who really embrace and develop their skills and grew in Waterford. And then we have, you know, Damira and Przemek with the Old Couch, amazing restaurant
from
as
Poland
well.
and Croatia.
Poland and Croatia. So in the same time, Waterford has the best produce available on our doorstep. We have everything here. We have the sea, we have the mountain. We can be very, very sustainable in the very small community. If you think about it, we can grow anything and everything we need. And, you know, like what Artkin stores are doing, you know, supporting these little producers, people who are not, they don't have a big names, they don't have the big budgets, but you need somebody to start. And the same with arts. For us, for me and my husband Harry, we always wanted to support arts in any way, shape or form we can. So if it's a feeding the artists, as I call it, you know, to give a little bit back sometimes, you know, to welcome people, to tell them about what to do in Waterford. I had a situation a few years ago, and personally I got really wind up because we had a couple in the restaurant, and I asked them if they're in Waterford for work or for pleasure. And they looked at me like, why would you come to Waterford? For pleasure. Ooh, I went like a crazy person, started listing what you can do in Waterford and what's going on and how nearly dare you say that Waterford is not a good place. I'm a person who is obviously not from Waterford, but we have incredible people in the very, very small community who do so much, and you guys don't do things to be on the first pages of whatever news. You do it because you love it. And it's very, in fact, it's like, you know, you feed from it. When you see what Spree is doing, you're like, when I see the new mural, I get emotional. Genuinely, I'm like, this is a very small community who produce so much, and it's really beautiful, you know?
One of the things, I think it was almost like a sort of an accidental bit of great publicity that Waterford got in the last couple of years was during the pandemic, when suddenly pictures of our public spaces, which again maybe we've taken for granted a little bit, I don't know, I certainly, you know, was blown away by the beauty of the public realm in Waterford when I came back, but I don't know if we realised how rare what we have is, which is a truly walkable city centre. And I do remember being slightly sceptical when I heard about the shared space idea, that pedestrians were going to be sharing streets with cars and that there wouldn't be any kind of clear delineation. And I thought, well, that's not going to end well, but it has actually, touch wood. It's been a really good experience. And I think, you know, I felt very proud. I was on Twitter one day during the pandemic, and somebody who wasn't from Waterford posted a photograph of John Robert Square and was sort of, this is how public realms should be done. And I think in some ways it's a blank canvas, isn't it, Catherine, for art, for making art, and also for community engagement.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would be so proud of our city architects, my colleagues. I think they've done amazing work on making our public realm so accessible. And it was a novel and new idea, really, the shared space, but it's worked so well, and the pandemic really brought out how we can use the city. And I think our art, as TV was referencing, the art in Waterford is very outdoors, it's very accessible, it's back to the 60% of the blue-collar worker. It's out there, it's for everybody, it's accessible, it's not hidden behind doors. And where it is, we're trying very much to make sure that people know that you can just walk in the door. Look how much of it is free and open and accessible. But the public realm, it's there as a blank canvas, really, to be used, isn't it, TV? I mean, when we're chatting, we're saying, well, what are we going to do? It's not, will we be able to do it? It's, what, you know, let's get programming, let's get using it. So we closed a portion of O'Connell Street, I suppose at the start of the pandemic really, and it has been really successful. The hospitality business is spilling out onto the street. We're hoping to put a crafts market in there at the weekends, and then Monday to Friday it reopens again and it's business as usual. But at the weekends it turns it into a brand new public space. And you can see that Bank Lane across the road as well. You can see different spaces we're allowed to experiment with the public realm here, I always feel, and with all the sustainability stuff and the carbon neutral coming into the city as well, these big open spaces are going to draw people into the city. Come in, use the space, enjoy the space, embrace the art. The murals are there for everybody to see. They're not hidden in behind doors. What TV does, that's not hidden in behind a door. So I just feel the public realm provides that blank canvas for the rest of us to come and be innovative, be creative. How are we going to use the city? Like Fáilte Ireland gave us funding for parasols. They're all around the city now. So let's forget about the rain and the wet and the cold and all the rest of it. Let's embrace it. Let's use this blank canvas. We also got funding to light up the city walls. So it's about celebrating what we have here and the uniqueness of Waterford. And to me, that is so important.
And do you see what has happened during the pandemic and since with our, really embracing the public realm, which was there and it looked great, but I don't think people used it as much as they're using it now. Are we seeing the beginning of something? Is there much more that we can do? Can we build on that blank canvas and bring the community life into the streets even more?
Well, I think people's eyes are really, really opened to the possibilities, like areas like O'Connell Street and Mary Street and that, where you don't see kids out because there's a lot of traffic. During the pandemic, the kids are out playing football on the street. Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, I'd love to have five-a-side soccer going on with kids from the buildings, a multicultural five-a-side soccer happening on the street on Saturdays. Amazing, there's just huge opportunities. Of course, our quays, and hopefully with the North Quays project, that the quays become a wide open space for the citizens of the city to use. And we saw it in COVID. There was picnics and people, they had to meet somewhere and hopefully socially distance and all the rest, but they were using the quays, they were using the river. So if we can get that vision and get the city back as that blank canvas, I think there's enormous opportunity. But TV obviously is the king of using the public realm.
What do you think, TV? Is there more that we can do? Even can we build on some of what we saw happen organically during the pandemic and make that really part of our city's life for the future?
Well, I think you have to keep reinventing. I was only thinking, listening to some of the other speakers this morning, someone mentioned kind of 2040, and that's actually something we need to think about ourselves now a bit more. What does that look like? What does here look like in 2040? Because now is the time that we've got to start investing time and effort in creating the platform that will eventually, there'll be someone here in 2040, and it won't be me. So one of the things I think that we do have to, on a community-wide basis, is invest time and effort and finding the next generation of community leaders. Let they be in arts, let they be in scouting, let them be in sport, and because a lot of skills have been learned over the years. And they don't have to get the same bruised knees we got or the bruised elbows we got. There's a lot of information. So we need some sort of a forum, a place where we can mentor and train the next generation of people that will be leading this city. And that's going to be so important, because the fruits of everything that's happening now, as Ruth said earlier on, we've got to have a clear vision about what does the place look like in 2040, and then work back from there and put the steps in place so that it can happen.
And actually, that kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to ask you. So I suppose, we don't want to be Pollyanna about it either. Waterford has challenges. There are things we could do. There are problems. What is the one thing, either big or small, that all three of you would like to see happen to improve life in Waterford for the community here? Camilla, do you want to have a stab at that? I'm really putting you on the spot.
I think what is very important for Waterford in the moment to start to believing in themselves a little bit, because even when Waterford won the best place to live in Ireland, people from Waterford we don't deserve that, it's not that great. I just want people of Waterford to start to believing in themselves and really see what they have. And I think what has to happen, and I'm not joking, Waterford has to win her league this year. It has to happen. I'm sick of it because 2008, I was pregnant with my son and my husband was very upset, and then it happened again and happened again. So please, can we please win All Ireland and have it done? And then I think that would really bring people together. And I think we need a big success. And on more serious note, somebody mentioned that today we have so many empty buildings in the city center. And you look around and there's a housing crisis. And I think if more people give younger people chance to live in the city center, where they don't have to have a car, so then it's pollution and so on, it's, you know, you cut that off. Give them place to live that they can afford. And I think if we open these empty spaces for artists, for musicians, and for younger people, so they can afford living in the city, that would really bring city center back up. Because in the moment we live on the outskirts. And town, city center, it's quiet in the night times, except, you know, the pubs where they are. So I think that, I would love to see that. Is
that something, Catherine, that could happen in the cultural quarter? You know, because it is such a vibrant area, and it is the kind of area that I think young people would really enjoy living. Is there an opportunity, do you think, to do some of that over-the-shop living?
I think there would be a lot of opportunity for it. I'll let Michael Walsh be dealing with housing policy and all of that complicated picture. I mean, we have the School of Architecture there with the students in the cultural quarter. A lot of the new communities who are living there, it was all babies 10 years ago. There's lots of teenagers now. Wouldn't it be great if they felt that Waterford was somewhere they wanted to stay and live and work and live and all the rest of the opportunities there. But of course, it's a very complex picture around housing and how we can manage housing. And now we have lots of more new people coming into the country, and we know there's a big crisis there trying to house them. So I'm not going to get into that whole complicated story, but it would absolutely be fantastic. And I think the aim is to get people back living in the city, because we can see it throughout Europe. People living over the shop. It makes such a big difference to have them.
It's a no-brainer in terms of, you know, quality of life for people, sustainability, connection with the city, building communities. And, you know, the buildings are there. We're lucky in that we have some very beautiful old buildings that are still, you know, structurally sound and in good condition. TV, what's your one big idea or one small idea for improving life in Waterford?
Well, I think housing is such a fundamental thing. You know, if you go back to the 50s, when an area like Johns Park was built, that gave so many families a start in life, a roof over their heads where kids could be brought up. And you look at the people that came out of Johns Park, continued to come out of Johns Park. And like, sometimes we talk about the arts and we talk about tech and we talk about pharma, and we talk about all these things, but sometimes we don't kind of give acknowledgement to either and celebrate other things Waterford does well, and particularly the council does well. There's a new housing development near me on Sleeve-Keel Road, and it could be up for any award for public housing anywhere in Europe. And there are a couple of other developments coming on stream like that. The council got to grips with things like the flooding. It isn't that long ago, in the winter, we'd all be 2 foot deep underneath water. And they did it in an imaginative way. We can still see the river, but there's protection there and stuff like that. So I think we need to kind of look at our other, because the local authority is the key mover here on so many things. But we need to celebrate the other departments as well and encourage them, not just the sexy ones. Do you know, it's often the small everyday things about fixing a road or making sure the flooding doesn't happen anymore, or someone's son and daughter getting a chance to start life as a family because there's a roof over their head. But in fairness, I do think a lot of that stuff that isn't on the front pages of the papers is going well here behind the scenes as well. So that's another building block to the future.
So the small, incremental, but really important work that's going on. That
powerful work. And in fact, it is going on. It is going on. And that, like, it's the non-sexy stuff sometimes that does make this the best place to live in Ireland.
That's a really good point. Catherine, what about you? One big or one small idea to improve life in Waterford for the people who live here?
I think for me, and it's one of our themes, but connectedness is really important, and we have spoken, it is very possible here. We have great links with you know, industry and the college and all the rest of it. But there's still a huge amount of people who wouldn't feel a citizenship or connectedness. We have 28% of the people living in the cultural quarter who have poor English. So can you imagine going out every day trying to get your shopping done? Never mind trying to get services, never mind trying to get on. And their kids are their translators. So that for me is a big part. Now we have so many programs and agencies and forums and all the rest working on that. That's really important. And then we've whole communities like Ballybricken to me is a jewel of the city. It should be really celebrated. It's a big green space in the city with old kind of, older communities up there. How do we start connecting them and giving them a voice and a citizenship of the city? And I think it is through what we're talking about today, and also that kind of sense that they have a voice. How do we get that through? But maybe arts and culture and science and tech as well will bring a lot of that in. And I think taking the traffic and a lot of that out of the city, getting people back into the city centre, all of that is going to help our connectedness. And to me, that is the way forward.
And for me, I don't know what any of you think about this. For me, one of the big missed opportunities as somebody who kind of came back and looked with fresh eyes was like, why is the entire Kia car park along by the river? Why are we putting this artificial divide between the city and the water? And, if the North Quays gets developed, and yet we have the ugly expanse of car parking.
It's the nicest part of town, really supposed to be.
It should be.
It's the first thing you see when you arrive to Waterford,
Yeah.
So I think though when you see the Greenway will be coming in, there's plans for a couple of
There's going
different
to be a little park
plazas
around
along
the
the way.
clock
So
tower,
look, it's starting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we need to keep pushing on that, I think. One of the things that you touched on there is something that I wanted to come back to. I mean, obviously, community is one of our themes this morning, and we have a new community of people arriving here, not through choice. Ukrainian people are coming, and I've personally been really heartened by the welcome that I see Waterford people giving them. But I want to get your thoughts, all three of you actually, on can we do more and how do we sustain that? Because we know, I think, that the people who've come here from Ukraine and are still arriving from Ukraine are not going to be here for a short time. They're going to be, whether they would have ever chosen this or not, they're going to be part of our community. So how do we make that as positive an experience for them and for the city as we possibly can? Do you want to take that one, Catherine?
Yeah,
you've done a lot
so
of work.
So the council is doing a vast amount of work, obviously, with the rehoming. And at the moment, it's emergency, it's crisis, it's about food, accommodation, trying to get kids into education. So meeting that layer of need that absolutely has to be met. But if they're here for a year, if they're here for 6 years, probably lots of people want to go home now, but maybe like Camilla, they'll decide this is actually somewhere I really like to stay and they want to have life. So one project that we're doing in the Cultural Quarter is developing a community and cultural hub where ideally we'll have translation, interpretation, all of those kind of services, I suppose to meet immediate needs, but then English language services. But ideally for the Ukrainian community and every other community, including our own native community, to use it as a hub, somewhere to celebrate your culture, where you came from, and to tell other people about your culture. And we do a lot of work around Africa Day, helping African people explain their culture and making those connections, getting to know each other. And that's how we're going to get those voices amplified in our community, because it's such an opportunity. And whatever we may think about it, there's going to be, as somebody said earlier, an older population, but a more multicultural population. So let's celebrate that and take all of the advantages from that. So I think with the Ukrainian community and every other migrant community, an opportunity to explain and help us understand where we're all coming from an intellectual and cultural point of view is a really important step. So we'll be working on that. It's not meeting necessarily an immediate need, but as time goes on, that's something we can certainly give back.
Yeah, I think TV right now, we're all focused on the immediate needs of the Ukrainian community, and obviously those immediate needs are really urgent. They need shelter, they need a means of income, they need to be able to feed themselves, they need to be able to educate their children. But once those immediate needs are met, what would you like to see us doing as a community to embrace the new Ukrainian community that will be here?
Well, to borrow a phrase from Camilla of all people, blow-ins. This is a city and a county of blow-ins. It's like the Vikings were blow-ins. The Normans were blow-ins. The Dacia were blow-ins. Even Kilkenny people. Do you know what I mean? And look at the richness we've got out of it. look at the richness we've got out of it. And like, here of all places has to see the value of people coming from different places and ultimately shaping what we are and who we are and what we can kind of do. And I think we should just kind of remember our past and embrace it and say, God, that was a powerful thing. We did okay out of those waves of blow-ins. Let's grab this bunch as well and see what they can do to help us build to that 2040 and beyond.
And Camilla, with your perspective as somebody who came here from Eastern Europe and knew nobody, had no friends, had no contacts, and sort of settled in, I mean, do you think Waterford is well placed to welcome the Ukrainian community, and what would you like to see us doing?
I think Ireland altogether, you know, when you look at the population in Ireland, I think you are the number one, Ireland is the number one country per person helping in the world, and you are extremely generous. We are extremely generous. And a friend of mine actually is running a little shop in Tramor, free shop for Ukrainian ladies and families. And she said to me that she's so overwhelmed and so surprised how generous people are. In the moment, what the Ukrainian communities need, it's just feel safe and secure. That's the one thing, because you see, for me, it was easy. It was my decision. I made a decision to move to Ireland. It was my choice. I could go back home in a minute. They don't have that. And we have to understand that it's mostly women and children, and they left husband, brothers, fathers at home, and they don't know, every night they go to bed and they don't know what news they're gonna get in the morning. We have Ukrainian girl working for us at Momo, and I know from talking to her how hard it is for all of them. But what we do, I think it's incredible. They need time, they need to feel safe, and if we can give them that, I think that's more than enough for now. And you know, some communities mix and blend with Irish communities a little bit easier. Some people need more time, some people will go back home. But I think for people who are gonna stay here, they're gonna embrace that, and we're gonna embrace them, and we can learn from each other and grow together. Because I think that's what Waterford gives us, you know, that we are blowing. That was a port city, so we are here very open for others, and I think we can just help each other, no matter where they're from.
That's really something you just said there. That's what Waterford gives us, is what you said. And that's so true in my experience. I mean, I kind of came here by accident. I planned to be here for a year. I found it's a very hard place to get out of.
Yes, yes.
And we're not just talking about the traffic on the bridge.
But my God, Waterford has given me an awful lot. It has given me a life that I never kind of imagined. And to
the same for me.
Just capture what you said, that's what Waterford gives us. And it gives us a lot, you know.
It's more than you think that it gives us, because when you feel at home, because when people ask me where I'm from Waterford. In my head, I sound like an Irish person. Okay, I know that, but in my head, I do. I have a Waterford accent in my head. But, so when people are asking me, you know, they hear my accent, and obviously, oh, she is not from here. But in my heart, I'm from Waterford. I even said to my husband, when I die, he will sprinkle me in gillimins. He had this plan to put parts of me somewhere in Poland or whatever. And I said, like, no, this is my home. I don't want to be anywhere else. And it's a weird thing when you are from outside and you feel like at home so quickly. And I think this is what Waterford gives us. So we should be very grateful for what we have and embrace that.
To be clear, Camilla's not planning on departing.
I'm not going to die anytime soon anyway. But
just herself and Harry were daydreaming about what he'll do when she dies with her ashes.
Yes. So I want to be in one piece in Gillimins in Tramor. That's.
And we'll all make sure, if we're still here, that he follows through on that.
Please do.
Catherine, one of the other big challenges for Waterford and for Ireland is obviously climate change. And I think it is possible to live quite sustainably here in Waterford. I don't know whether I would say it's more possible than in other cities. In some respects it is. In other respects I think there's more we could be doing infrastructure-wise, and you know, to make the city more cycle-friendly. I think we've done a really good job of making the city pedestrian-friendly, but I don't think that pedestrian-friendly and cycle-friendly are two different things. I think they could be, you know, brought together a little bit more. But your, community engagement is one of your big things, and that's one of the big sort of pillars of the work that you do in the Cultural Quarter. Kevin was talking earlier on to his panel about community engagement and harnessing that to drive the climate change agenda. Do you think that there's a way that here in Waterford we can use community engagement and some of the creative energy that you and TV have been harnessing over the years to bring about maybe behaviour change that will lead to climate change? So we stop talking about it at an academic level and we actually put in place things that will make it easier for us to live more sustainably.
Well, I think at this stage everybody knows the argument has been made. There is no argument, we have to do something. We were lucky enough actually to achieve funding through Creative Ireland, the Creative Ireland programme, to run a project with Calmast in WIT. So there's your STEAM engagement programme for the Southeast. So we are working with 5 communities around 5 climate themes, but we've brought 5 creative approaches working with artists and creative thinkers on how to bring about, I suppose, that behaviour change rather than saying, oh yeah, it's happening. So for example, one of those is based in Ballybricken coming down into the Cultural Quarter, and it's not big scary messaging. Nobody wants to hear that anymore. Really, it's scary. Actually, it's acknowledged that a lot of teenagers now have a climate anxiety. So we don't need to do that. It's about communities coming together, working together with their kids, with their families. What can I do on a day-to-day level that's achievable? So our project in Ballybricken is called Greening the City. Excuse me. And that's about, it can be planting pots of seeds to grow your herbs on the garden. It could be looking at visioning what does Ballybricken Green look like in 10 years' time? How's that contributing to the decarbonisation? But in a fun, friendly, engaging, exciting way, not some big policy from top down. What we want is the community to have an active voice. They're coming back to the council and saying, this is what we want. This is what our family needs. This is what we can do to help our community. So in each one of the 5 projects, there's 3 city-based, 1 online and 1 rural, out in Kilmacthomas. And in each of those, what we want to do is activate 20 community, they might be community leaders now, but through working with creativity and that kind of open-minded approach, they'll be coming back to us, they'll be coming back to the council and saying, this is what we want, this is what we need. And we're giving them the tools and the language, but they have the tools themselves in terms of their own creativity. But a creative approach to doing something fun and engaging and getting that open-mindedness is equally as important as any government policy is going to be. So it's fantastic that Creative Ireland is coming in, supporting the community piece around that. So, I'm hoping in time, this is what we're going to see, is people activating for the policymakers to make that change.
I think that's a wonderful idea. We don't have long left, unfortunately, according to my very high-tech timing system here. I'm down to a minute left. So in the last minute or so, what do each of you think is the one thing that the rest of the country could take from Waterford's story and from Waterford's, I would like to call it Waterford's success story, because I think we've really come a long way in the last decade. I mean, we still have a distance to go in terms of maybe, job creation and getting more big industry here, but I think the bits that we've been able to control in this city, we've done a really good job at. What do you think the one thing that other places in Ireland could look at Waterford and go, yeah, we could try that? Catherine, do you want to?
Yeah, I think we're certainly opening our minds and opening our hearts and to the new people coming in, new ideas, and to me that open approach, and even in the confidence of the city, it's a more open place than it was when I came here even. So that open attitude. TV, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it'll be happening very soon. There's a program started by Waterford GA called Well Kids, and I haven't the slightest invented here, made up here, worked out, sweated out, blah, blah, blah. The program now exists and is actually out there in clubs. I haven't the slightest doubt it'll be copied all over the country. And that's just one example in real life that it's happening now. Waterford people in all walks of life are inventing things, are being inventive. There's people walking into your restaurant and they're going away. There's other restaurateurs going into your restaurant and going away with ideas. There's people coming to Spree Festival and they're taking things away. There's people going into Sanofi. There's people going into all the wonderful enterprise that are around us. It's already happening. It's already happening. Like, I mean, the thing is, we don't often realise ourselves we're so bloody good at not alone inventing things. Someone said about the 100 good ideas a day, but we're pretty good down here at taking some of those ideas and working them through what Richie Walsh called working through the resistance to bring the idea into full reality. There it is in front of you.
We're very good at making things happen ourselves, I think.
I think we are. Someone said
that.
I think Colin Jefferson sort of said maybe way back to the start of this, you know, being on the ropes.
Yeah.
Maybe without having government ministers coming here with the state car with bootloads of cash, maybe we had to find out how to do things ourselves, because no one was going to make it easy for us. But we do a share of whinging about it. But of course, everyone everywhere whinges. Has anyone ever met a New York taxi driver, for God's sake? Do you know what I mean? So everyone whinges. But in fairness, we do more well than we sometimes think we do ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And finally to you, Camilla, one thing that you think the rest of the country could ape?
I think if the rest of the country could have as big heart as Waterford has, then we will be doing well, you know. If we can spread the love a little bit, I think it's good enough, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much to my three panellists. And TV and Catherine's doors are open. Camilla's restaurant door is always open. Yes. You know, for people who want to share ideas and talk about ways to bring the science and the arts and the technology thing together. Right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Jennifer, Camilla, TV, and to Catherine. Thank you. Sometimes it's even a shame to stop the conversations, because it's really good to hear this. As I said, it's a morning to, as TV said, we don't sometimes think that we're as good as we are. I remember, it was a long time ago now, the late Jill Dando. She brought some cameras to Waterford. I think it was mid-90s. And there was an outcry, I remember, because we all watched the programme, and then she said, Waterford City, yeah, you know, it's not the prettiest, but you could spend a pleasant hour or two. And here we are now. I won't say, I mean, poor Jill is no longer with us, but this long forward, and now we're the best place to live in Ireland. So not just to spend an hour or two. So I think that in itself is a testament to how far we've come. And so we are now, of course, looking to the future and getting that balance right. And so Conor Goodman, Managing Editor of the Irish Times, will now host a one-on-one chat with Michael Welsh, the man in the know, who's the Chief Executive of Waterford City and County Council. Please welcome them both. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Conor Goodman. I was walking through the lobby there and saw that there's a production of My Fair Lady on the theatre at the moment. So if anybody is confused, I was expecting Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle. There's apologies. This is the last session of the talking shop. So if you're a bit perplexed, just bear with us, and My Fair Lady will be starting in about 8 hours, I'd say. So I'm here to speak to Michael Walsh, Chief Executive of Waterford City and County Council. It's to ask Michael about the, I suppose, steps that led to Waterford being named the best place to live in Ireland 2021, and then what comes next. I might just give a little bit of information just for background. I was the chair of the judges that made the selection, so although I wasn't quite involved in if you've ever been in a kind of a jury room or anything like that, the 4 judges made the decision. They were my colleague Rosita Boland, a journalist for the Irish Times, Zainab Bolladale, who's a presenter of the nationwide programme, Simon Wall, who is an architect. I always think that's a great name for an architect, Simon Wall, and the 4th member who's due to sort of stage fright. Her name has temporarily disappeared from my brain. She's a fantastic person. She's GP in Monaghan and brought so much to it. So they really made the decision, but I suppose, you know, if you're in that situation, you sort of influenced it a little bit. The reasons were, there was a short list which included places like Clonakilty, Galway, Killarney, and Glaslough village in County Monaghan. And the reasons really that Waterford won, I suppose we felt, yes, those other places are fantastic. You know, the likes of Clonakilty and Killarney are well known to people. But Waterford was chosen because we felt it was a place really on the up. So some of those places have, you know, they've probably got awards before. Waterford is evolving. It has gone from a place that was, you know, really bore the brunt of the 1980s recession, and then followed by the closure of Waterford Glass, and has, as a city, pulled itself up. It has this fantastic now, vibrant central area. It has a great spirit. I think it has a great egalitarianism, which was one of the things that came up in the judging, that compared with other places, it's not so you might say hierarchical. The same kind of social stratification that is in so many places in Ireland. It's in Waterford, it's everywhere, but it's much less so here. And I was struck by that. But the very first time I came to Waterford in late 1980s, when I was introduced to it by my college friends, dear friends still, Anne-Marie Power and Fionnuala Brennan, and they introduced me to Jeff's in Waterford and the Vic in Tramore, and that's sort of my Waterford credentials. I've been coming here since, but I liked the place immediately, and it was for that sort of ordinary welcome you get from everybody. I mean, I think Jennifer O'Connell is probably she's the poshest person I know in Waterford, and she has no airs or graces really. So. So those were just some of the factors, as well as its spectacular natural setting and how the city takes advantage of those things. So, Michael, I'll shut up now. I want to ask you a few questions. I suppose the main thing is, you know, this is a city that's really going somewhere now. How did it get to that point? You started as city manager in, I think, 2007. Thinking back then, it was a different place. What was your vision then? Can you even remember exactly what the vision was then, and to what extent has it changed or been achieved?
I mentioned to you earlier that it felt like I caused the recession when I was appointed city manager in November 2007, because the wheels came off very rapidly, I can assure you, after that. And I suppose, look, we had a very tough few years. There's no point in saying otherwise. In fact, I'd say the first 4 or 5 years were fairly tough now in the grand scheme of things. In some respects, that was an opportunity because it forced us to reappraise where we were in many respects. It culminated with one particularly bad event, which was the Talk. It was controversial at the time, if you know what I mean, closure and whatnot. And but that period of time post 2007 really gave us cause to look a little bit deeply at strategy and otherwise. And I think some of the key components, if you look at urban regeneration and any place else, there's a few critical success factors, those that have been through it, and they are you do need a bit of public investment. You do need to drive collaboration. They're probably the two key actual critical success factors. And optimally then the other one, and we decided to put a bit of effort of consequence into it, and it's a continuum and continues to go on, is that your city centre is your front door, no matter what way you turn it. I use the expression that nobody went anywhere and said there was lovely suburbs out there. And so in that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, strategically, and then in crisis there is actually opportunity, and some of the opportunity started from where we are here in the broader Viking Triangle. from Waterford Crystal, moving it into the centre here as a visitor attraction, starting to get a bit of footfall, a bit of numbers, and then building the bigger proposition. Got significant public investment in that at the time. And that was a little bit of the catalyst. But essentially the strategy was, we've got to change, we've got to develop the city centre as the front door with that greater mix of uses in many respects, and spread our employment pool. We've historically looked at the city sprung from the port in many respects. The portal function had shifted downstream. You had a really heavy reliance on, we'll call it traditional manufacturing. So you had to try and spread that in many respects and ultimately develop the city centre as this mix. We decided that tourism was a part of the economy that, to be honest, Waterford City wouldn't have done an awful lot, that we wanted to put that into the mix simply because it works nowadays. City centres, they used to be about retail completely, but nowadays they're about everything from culture, retail, tourism. It's that broader mix of people coming together, both from local and outside. So strategically, we decided to concentrate on these areas as a starting point and try and spring it forward from there, really.
So that's what you were trying to do. And then there's how you did it. So I know from the number of people who were here, you had the local industry represented, the university, the IT now becoming a university, the port, City Council itself, the County Council and City Council had to merge. That's an awful lot of institutions, and institutions are not known in Ireland or anywhere else for their nimble ability to change quickly. So how do you, and every time I ask, who's really behind this kind of renaissance in Waterford, the name of Michael Walsh comes up sooner or later in every conversation. So you are sort of il capo di tutti capi in Waterford. How did you manage to, I suppose, motivate not only the leaders of the institutions, because sometimes the leaders are easy to get on board, but to leverage those institutions themselves to pull all this together into marching in lockstep together to achieve those ends you've described?
Well, I would have said, to be honest about it, I think somebody mentioned earlier the scale of city, where I consider the scale of city to be a distinct advantage in many respects.
Yeah.
And ironically, and for a man to say this, the size doesn't matter. The reality is it's not about increasing scale. Okay, increasing scale is important in the context of it guarantees economic growth in some respects and demand in the marketplace, if we want to put it in those terms. But at the same time, being a niche, your micro city in European terms, it is to be the best that you are in that context, I think, is the thing. And so in terms of getting people to collaborate, that scale is significant, because you tend to know the people. Do you know what I mean? You tend to know more people that have that capacity to help in the broader thing. We made a very deliberate effort at the time, to be honest about it, strategically, to pull in private sector people generally to help us in many ways.
Yeah.
And to be honest about it, we isolated them in terms of capacity and otherwise, and deliberately approached them and asked them nicely first, and then we bullied them a little bit if they weren't coming. And no, but at a certain level, we did a bit of that strategically. I would have said the state agency players and others, to be fair to them, we shared, the need to do this, and we had that pressing demand at the time of crisis to do it, if you know what I mean. So we had that advantage that everybody was able to recognise there's a need here. We do need to come together and we need to do it. So like I said, there's opportunity in crisis, and I suppose we took advantage of it a little bit, but that helped. And then there would have been other historical initiatives that helped as well. Singular projects like the tall ships and different things like that, where we'd already pulled people together in many respects for a specific purpose outlet, if you know what I mean. But now you were broadening that demand and saying, look lads, we've got to work together. So whether it's Waterford Chamber, the business community, individuals within the business community, or the state players that you mentioned. And that's all the way out to the IDAs, the Enterprise Ireland. It just made it a little bit easier at the time, and we've managed to sustain those relationships. And as you well know, relationships are about putting in the work in the first instance, and then in the relationship, and then you need to get a few successes along the way and get that bit of momentum. And I think we have a little bit of that now at the moment, if we can drive it on, and it's then easier to keep people going with you, if you know what I mean.
In judging the whole process, it's a fairly daunting thing. You're standing up and saying this is the best place to live. So you need to do it in a pretty rigorous way. So we would do like you'd come down, send a few people down, send a researcher down, talk to a lot of people, observe as well, and then you're doing kind of data analysis behind the scenes as well, looking at say house prices. Affordability was definitely a major factor in the teeth of a housing crisis. We didn't want it to, one of the other contenders was the thing Malahide in Dublin. The average house price of the last 50 sales was about 700 grand. And the average house price in Waterford of the last 50 sales was about 200. So it was, it's not a pushover, that's a lot of money, but compared to other places, Waterford was very affordable. The other thing that came up in the data analysis was we would look at a thing called the deprivation index, looking at kind of pockets of social deprivation and unemployment and antisocial behaviour and those kind of things all come up there. Areas of Waterford do not feature well in that. It has some of the worst pockets of social deprivation in the country, and that's right in the city. And that was I must say, it was a point of debate. Can you give it to a place that has this level of social problems? Now, we felt ultimately yes, but that must be. It hasn't really come up in the discussion today, where we've talked about the public realm and those nice things, but the social deprivation is a reality in parts of Waterford. So how do you change that? It's maybe one of the hardest things to change.
I think it's changing, to be honest about it. I do believe that. By the way, I do believe that it's a good thing. I think people referenced here earlier, like cities are for everybody.
Yes.
Right. They need to be democratic in the truest meaning of that. And so, if you went the other route and you're thinking you'd end up giving it to a retirement village or something that's a non-confined entity, a nice confined entity, I think that very mix here in Waterford is what gives it that little bit of edginess and is reflected in the arts and the culture and in an awful lot of other activity. So the challenge is not only to celebrate that, obviously improve it. We don't want anybody in society to be deprived, which is ultimately what the deprivation index ought to reflects a little bit. But there is a lot of work going on in that space. First approach to that is we want to lift all boats, because if you get the overall level of economic, and not just economic, but every element of activity raised, if you make the place more attractive to invest in, to live in, to work in, or whatever, then that lifts the opportunity for everybody. And alongside that, there would be specific initiatives then in these areas. We're involved in a Sláinte Care one at the moment, for example, where we've, again, state actors and others coming together to try and drive better health outcomes. But they're informed by the economic factors and a lot of other things. So that's not only how we're measuring it, if you know what I mean, as to how we're seeking to improve these. And it is about getting that collaborative action led by communities optimally in this instance, because communities are, if there is a mistake made in Ireland in terms of community development, and I'd see it happening in inner city Dublin or someplace, it has to be, we do things to the communities or for them, when actually we have to do it either with them or help them, even better still, to do the stuff, to develop their inherent capacity and their own capacity. And that's generally the approach we're trying to take in doing that. And I do believe that it is a shift. Many of these areas in Waterford, as a matter of interest, are the older areas of the city, so they have some of the inherent character and traits that are very positive in many respects and have serious resilience in their communities. And what you're trying to do is tap into that to actually make it better, continue to make it better for everybody.
This is maybe a slightly mischievous question now, but it's the best place to live in Ireland. You don't live in it yourself, though. You don't live in it. So what's that about? I mean, I ask it somewhat seriously as on a personal level, but also seriously in terms of what people were talking about the repopulation of the central area of the city. Is there a natural impediment to people living in the city, or why don't you live in it? Why don't more people live in it?
The answer to the last bit of the question is easy enough. It's cheaper than divorce. She wouldn't let me. No, and that choice, I suppose, my choice of where I lived was informed by having moved house about 6 times career-wise, and where I am now being relatively central to opportunity in our system, if you know what I mean. I do think it's one of the big challenges. I think it's the next big step challenge, actually, for Waterford, is to actually get more employment in the first instance, because employment in the city centre will inform the living space where people choose to live in the future, and to equally get more people living. I think we're at the end of a cycle, ironically, in terms of some of that, because, look, we're an agrarian economy, and we all wanted a bit of grass back. And, relatively recently, we're all from the country, if you know what I mean. And we that inherent bit of attachment to the bit of green back in front, we all wanted it. And that was reflected, I would have said, sort of 40 years ago, not just here in Waterford, but everywhere, by the movement to the suburbs, which was the living over the shop. I can have a bigger space and a bigger house out there. And in Waterford, we've actually a problem with our scale in that sense.
Yes.
Because you can be in and out in a quarter of an hour, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there are people here from my organisation go home for lunch 3 miles out the road, in the Dunmore Road, and are back in within the hour, if you know what I mean. So in a sense, that scale is a little bit of an issue, but I would equally say that switch is beginning to, that cycle is coming around again now, because I see younger people seeing the opportunity of living in and higher amenity areas as we develop the city centre a bit more, make it a bit more attractive. You now have all the services on your doorstep. They don't quite have the same attachment to that bit of green back in front, if you know what I mean. They live differently. But use the public realm spaces.
Aside from that, which is what people want, but even if all of the services are there and the public realm is much more attractive to live in, that problem of dereliction is a very deep-seated one, as Catherine mentioned earlier. It's a complex problem, and she said, "I'm going to leave that question to Michael." So, so I put it to you now. I mean, the part about dereliction is it's so difficult to solve because it's bound up with private property ownership and constitutional rights and all of that. Is there a way around it?
There are instruments there. Let's be clear, it's not even the problem of dereliction. The problem is the cost of development of property, full stop, in confined sites and at some scale, because you want to achieve densities to get the maximum value of the services and everything else that are in place. And that is challenging, and it's challenging everywhere. Bar maybe Dublin. All the regional Ireland currently have that problem. You simply, if you want to build 4-storey, over 4 floors, an apartment in Waterford at the moment, you costs you 400k for an apartment. There are the Creek O'Neill provisions at national level, which will help, where there's £100,000 subsidy for owner-occupiers. I think I'd like to see that increased a little bit. We're doing a lot in terms, I think, more than any other body in the country. We're doing stuff on lease and repair schemes. I think we'd be the absolute top of the tree in the country in terms of what we're doing in that space. That's for social housing, though. And we need to keep a mix of the private sector housing here. We do also have to increase demand. If we have a slight issue in that context in Waterford, we don't have enough of what I would call the young mobile population in the centre who are more likely to occupy these, in employment in the centre that are more likely. So there's a bit of chicken and egg in it. We must increase the employment and we must do the other. We're lucky we have significant investments. We have a city centre URDF programme where we've something like 32 million in grant aid, and we're going to be focusing on redeveloping some of those older properties and bringing them back to purposeful economic use for both employment and residential. I think some of it does need state intervention to make it happen, because the market, it won't happen. It hasn't happened in 30 years, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen in that context. So I'd still see the opportunity there, but I would equally agree it's one of the bigger challenges. Next big challenge is the way I'd describe it, but it has to be fully pronged. You make the centre more attractive, you generate more employment so that you generate a bit more demand, and then you do what I'd call the public policy interventions that can be anything from CPO to derelict sites to everything. We have a very unique attitude to property in Ireland, by the way, as well. We believe in holding on to it forever and not selling it, despite the fact that it's costing us money nearly, if you know what I mean. We refuse some of those properties, and this isn't peculiar to Waterford. You'd need to get money with them to recover them. Yet people have this notional thing that the value will change positively sometime soon, if you know what I mean. But we would be very active in that space, but I do see it as the big next potential in some respects, but equally a challenge in Waterford.
You're obviously good at getting things done. You alluded a bit to the sort of political machinations that help make that happen. The bullying you refer to, I don't know if that's jokey or not, but you get things done. But people also say that Michael Walsh is a visionary. So you've taken it, or you've certainly assisted in taking the city to this point. What is the vision for the next phase, for those next 10, 20 years that have been discussed here? What's your vision for it?
I think the vision is what I described earlier as being that European micro-city of real identity and niche strengths. We can't compete with the large cities of the world, if you know what I mean. We have some advantages in terms of location on our peers here in Ireland, but it is to be that high-quality niche urban centre with good quality living and a really strong city centre and vibrant city centre. And there are things that we need to continue doing to make that happen. It is about continuing to develop the city centre as that front door, if you know what I mean, or that whatever. It is about continuing the transition in employment, because the employment was historically, obviously, traditional manufacturing and the port related and otherwise. We've now transitioned really significantly, and I don't think a lot of people recognise the scale of that transition to what I would call advanced manufacturing, technology being driven predominantly out of WIT and otherwise, as well as some of the traditional service sector activities and all the other things. We need to really continue to build on that. And I see that as a transition that will continue to happen. In terms of development terms, we do need to see the city develop to the north side. And people will talk about the North Quays and things like that. That's not so much about the North Quays as it is about the city is a little bit on one wing at the moment. The city centre is not central, if you know what I mean.
It's off centre.
Yeah. And that effectively does a bit of damage, if you know what I mean, to the capacity of the city centre. The more you have around that ring, if you know what I mean, the more sustainable the city centre is. So ultimately we want to see development at the north side, and whether we all believed it should be Waterford and not Kilkenny, it'd be controlling interest there or otherwise, but it's sort of irrelevant as long as it happens. You can walk a few hundred yards over there and find the green field, if you know what I mean.
There'll be a pedestrian bridge, is that?
Yeah, so when we talk about the North Quays in many respects, it's about the key infrastructure. Yeah, we want to see development on the North Quays because it's been a derelict site, and people raised here earlier about it, the use of the quays since the port moved 20 or 30 years ago. Obviously that's laying fallow, and that just is, in terms of your eye line coming into Waterford or anything, isn't positive. But the bigger picture things are to get that new bridge, a new integrated transport hub that would be a first in Ireland, which puts everything together.
Yeah.
We have this sustainable transport corridor that's the Greenway on one side and runs right the way through to Doonross. But it's actually going to be where the bigger developing areas in Waterford are going to be in the future. So you have this completely integrated or separated sustainable transport corridor connecting the new development areas in Waterford and bringing them straight to the city centre. And then there's some access improvements and otherwise as well on the other side. So they're the big picture wins.
When do you see those happening? I mean, realistically, is that something that, will that happen before 2030? Will it happen before 2040?
That'll happen. I certainly hope so. We're tendering the infrastructure at the moment, and it's to be, our tenders are in at the end of May, and even though we're a little bit frightened about the world of tendering and construction costs and every other thing at the moment, but we are, in terms of approval and everywhere, that far, if you know what I mean. So they're ready to rock. We then need to prove, I suppose, at a certain level that development can happen on the quays itself, because part of the win and the economic justification sits with that. The way I describe that is we've been up that hill and come back down off the hill in terms of previous developer. We're now a long way back up the hill again, is the way I describe it. Right. And we'd be hopeful, very hopeful to be honest about it, that we'll have a contemporaneous development and all those come together. Let's be realistic, our targets would be to be on site in 2023 is what we're working to at the moment.
And that's working with a private developer?
Working with a private developer and some of the other state agencies in terms of pulling it together. And look, you can never say you're absolutely confident in a situation until there's something signed, dotted, sealed and delivered, if you know what I mean. But I would be confident at the same time that we're very nearly there.
Very good, very good. Michael, I think we might wrap it up there. I would like to say thanks to, on behalf of my colleagues, thanks for the welcome that's been shown to the Irish Times, various people who've come down, the hospitality shown by Karen Cheevers and for her organisation of this very interesting, fantastic event, and also to Camilla for having us in her restaurant. To you, I would say I congratulate you on all you've done to help make Waterford the best place to live in Ireland. When nobody works forever. All civil servants retire sometime. When you move on, what will happen then? Will there be a the king is dead sort of power struggle? Will there be? Can it be, is there enough there for this to all move on without you?
And I wouldn't want it personalised in that way at all, Conor. The reality is there's a whole host of people involved in anything like this, and my job in many respects sometimes is just not to get in the way of them, And so in terms of my own Waterford City and County Council, there's plenty of very good people there, and indeed visionary people. I'd laud our architects and our historical people, because, like I say, getting out of their way was the greater challenge in many respects. I would equally say that in terms of collaboration and people working together, all the different actors coming together, I don't believe it's certainly not down to me. I have a council that would hold us to account, I can say it fairly reasonably aggressively every month, and are absolutely driving and passionate and interested. People give out about politicians and everything, but the reality is there isn't a single one of them don't want the absolute best for Waterford, and they're continually trying to drive that. So it's about that mix and Maloo. I think Waterford's entering a really interesting phase, and look, I've been very proud if I've made some small bit of contribution in terms of it. But it is a phase. Cities are wonderful places, urban areas, because it's this milieu of activity that's ongoing. They continually change, they're continually sort of being ripped up and starting again and doing everything. And I just see this as a phase here in Waterford City's span, if you know what I mean. And I do think it's interesting. It's ironic that it's coming out of negatives, but there are inherent longer-term positives in some of those. Waterford Crystal's dominance, you reflected it all there, inherently wasn't necessarily a good thing for Waterford, if you know what I mean. There'd be an argument it might have stifled creativity or maybe stifled entrepreneurship or otherwise, because it was that dominant an influence in the grand scheme of things. Whereas I see this natural transition in some respects to Waterford, out of all that trauma, gradually shifting. You can see the confidence shifting and psychology shifting a little bit. And I just think it's a really interesting space to be working in the first instance. But I'll be very interested to see. I have great faith that it will really take off. And again, I don't measure take off in terms of size necessarily or economic activity, even though it will grow. But it's about the quality. It's about being that place that is a little bit edgy, has time for its people, its arts, its community, and rests on its inherent uniqueness. And I think there's a sufficiency there to ensure that to happen in the coming years, to be honest.
Well, maybe just thank the audience for listening to everything today. Thank the people of Waterford and congratulate them again on their collective effort. And you know, the Irish Times is really delighted to bestow this honour on Waterford. We think it's very well deserved. And Michael, thanks for answering all the questions and thanks for your time.
Thanks very much indeed. If we could ask you both to stay on the stage, because there is actually a presentation that you have to make. So we'll ask you to stand, and I think we have to take the chairs away for the photograph. But again, thanks a million to Conor, and thanks to Michael. Yeah, I mean, I think a bit preaching to the choir a little bit today. I'm not sure how many people are from out of town. But it is good. It is good to get that information and to hear it for ourselves, and that hopefully we'll take it out and do that thing of going out and being the best ambassadors for Waterford City ourselves. So we'd like to call on His Worship the Mayor of Waterford, Councillor Joe Kelly, to formally accept the award, and I believe we have it, and he's there. So if you'd like to come out, yeah. And also, while they're setting that photograph up, it's a good time to mention that the Theatre Royal here, it's part of the Green Arts Initiative. So it's another piece of the sustainability message. And do get a look at that out in the foyer as well. So, and thanks to all the staff here, Dermot and Heather of the Theatre Royal, who've been fantastic all morning. Thank you, and all the other guys as well.
Thank you. We try not to have an industrial accident with this enormous item here. Congratulations to you and Waterford.
It's an absolutely fantastic piece, and it's from the Irish Times. I think this was the cover in September, was it? September 2021?
Was it the cover of the magazine the week after the announcement?
Yep. So again, it's magnificent, and it's a great size, and no doubt will hang in the Mayor's parlour for everyone to see. And Noel, if we can have Michael in the picture as well, please, that'd be great.
Are we coming in? Keep going in the centre?
No, you got something.
So thank you to everybody for being here as well, and thank you for participating. It's a bank holiday weekend, so I'm sure you're all off for something nice. But of course, do join us for lunch before you go, and that's in the garden room in the Medieval Museum, so you can make your way there. That's it. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the weekend and God bless. Thank you. Sorry, guys, could we have some or some lights on the stage again, please? We just have one more picture to take. Thank you.
Can I have you?